Faites l'appel, s'il vous plaît, Madame le greffier.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélier. Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Berlat.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de La Trinité.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Présent.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Grouville. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Maune.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Southern.
Présent.
Madame le député Labbé.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Tadier.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Luce.
Présent.
Madame le député Dublay. Monsieur le député Morel.
Présent.
Madame le député Lehegara.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Ayer.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Ward.
Présent.
Madame le député Alves.
Présente.
Madame le député Gardner.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Ghost.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Farnham. Madame le député Moore. Monsieur le député Mezek.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Osef.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Balash.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Coles.
Présent.
Madame le député Corray.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Ward.
Présent.
Madame le député Miles.
Présente.
Madame le député Scott.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Renouf.
Présent.
Madame le député Curtis. Madame le député Feltham.
Présente.
Madame le député Binet.
Présente.
Madame le député Jeune.
Présente.
Madame le député Miller.
Présente.
Madame le député Howell.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Binet. Monsieur le député Ferry.
Présent.
Madame le député Kovac.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Curtis. Madame le député Ward.
Présente.
Madame le député Wilson.
Présente.
Madame le député Stevenson.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Andrews.
Présent.
Monsieur le doyen.
Notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait les cieux et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi les gouvernements et les puissances de la terre pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, de les conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit que toute leur délibération est accompagnée de ta bénédiction. Réussisse au bien et au soulagement du peuple, qu'il te plut de commettre à leurs soins. Car nous t'en prions au nom et par le mérite de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite sur la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonnons nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous envoie pas en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Car à toi la règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Monsieur le connétable de Grouville.
Défait.
Madame le député Dublay.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Farnham.
Défait. Les États sont constitués.
Sir, may I make a small
statement, just to say that many members will know this, but I would like to put on record that I'm attending to a close family member who's critically ill, and it is for this reason that I've missed some of the last 2 days' debates and votes, and will also miss some more of the rest of this sitting. I will be attending remotely where I can. I would like to take this also the opportunity to thank members who have offered their support to me and my family.
Thank you very much. Maintenant, il y a une déclaration de Monsieur le député Tadier.
Merci, Monsieur le Bailly. Aujourd'hui, le 20 mars, c'est la journée internationale de la francophonie où on célèbre la langue française et les valeurs du monde francophone. En tant que président de la section jersiaise de l'Assemblée parlementaire de la francophonie, je profite de cette occasion afin de souligner ce qu'on fait à Jersey pour promouvoir la langue et renforcer nos rapports avec d'autres pays francophones. Bien que je ne sois pas responsable du travail du gouvernement, je voudrais quand même reconnaître le travail des collègues gouvernementaux sur nos liens diplomatiques et économiques. Le département de l'économie et des affaires étrangères, le bureau des îles anglo-normandes, c'est-à-dire le Bion, de même que le bureau à Bruxelles. En 2025, on verra le 10e anniversaire du protocole d'accord entre Jersey et le département de la Manche. Et on continue à coopérer de la même manière avec la région de la Bretagne et le département de Ille-et-Vilaine. Cette coopération comprend des mesures dans les domaines de l'éducation, de la culture, des transports, des sports, du commerce et des ressources renouvelables. On a établi des accords également avec l'Université de Caen, Rennes Business School et le ministère français de l'Éducation en Normandie, mais il reste néanmoins du travail à faire. Cela veut dire que nos étudiants ont la possibilité de suivre des études en France, en anglais ou en français. Au niveau pratique, on a récemment vu l'annonce des ports de Jersey concernant l'introduction d'un lien aérien avec cette île et Paris. Le gouvernement a aussi décidé de soutenir le service de Manche-Île Express entre Jersey et la Normandie. En 2024, la visite de l'ambassadrice de la France au Royaume-Uni a eu lieu. C'était la première visite depuis le Brexit. On accueillera aussi cette année l'ambassadeur de la Roumanie, un pays qui fait aussi partie de l'APF. À Paris, nos fonctionnaires peuvent accéder régulièrement à l'ambassade britannique pour y travailler, ce qui facilite les réunions intergouvernementales avec le Quai d'Orsay, le ministère français des Affaires étrangères. On verra pour la première fois cette année un événement à Paris qui marquera l'anniversaire du jour de la Libération et fêtera l'histoire des rapports Jersey-français. Le gouvernement a aussi établi des relations avec le programme Young Leaders du Conseil franco-britannique. J'invite tous les membres de cette Assemblée à reconnaître les efforts de tous ceux dans l'île qui s'attellent à renforcer à la fois le statut de la langue française à Jersey et nos liens avec nos amis francophones, et qui soutiennent notre communauté plus généralement. Surtout les consuls honoraires, l'Alliance française et la Maison de la Normandie et de la Manche. Ce dernier qui fête son 30e anniversaire cette année, mais aussi les enseignants du français, voire les enseignants de toutes les langues. La section du français de l'Eisteddfod et les membres de l'association des jumelages de toutes nos paroisses. Toutes les associations et ces personnes sont importantes et on les doit de grands remerciements. Quant à notre section de l'APF, nous continuons à nous engager dans le travail de cette communauté interparlementaire. En octobre 2024, des délégués de notre section ont participé à la conférence de la région Europe de l'APF où on a parlé de la cyber security. Comme l'année dernière, on prévoit bientôt la présentation d'un rapport aux États et coopération avec le comité exécutif de la section de Jersey du Commonwealth Parliamentary Association sur l'activité des sections pendant 2024. Je rappelle aux membres que Jersey fait partie du petit groupe de pays qui participent aux affaires de l'APF et du CPA. Du 18 au 20 mai cette année, la section va accueillir une conférence de l'APF à Jersey. La conférence des présidents de la région Europe aura lieu avec un thème de discussion du renforcement du rôle des jeunes adultes dans un développement économique et durable. L'APF n'est pas une organisation politique avec un grand P, mais parlementaire. Il est pourtant impossible de rester aveugle à ce qui se passe dans le monde francophone au niveau politique. Je pense surtout à la tension actuelle entre le RDC, la République démocratique du Congo, et le Rwanda, et aux relations entre le Canada et son voisin du Sud. Ces situations font penser aux valeurs de l'Organisation internationale de la francophonie, le OIF, surtout la promotion de la paix et de la démocratie, des droits humains et de plus encouragement de la coopération économique afin de réaliser un développement durable. Je l'ai dit auparavant, mais je le répète aujourd'hui, apprendre une langue, c'est apprendre une mode de pensée et de rencontrer l'autre. Bien qu'il y ait un bon nombre entre nous qui parlent français, je suis tout à fait conscient que ce n'est pas une langue que tout le monde comprend. Ce qui est aussi le cas pour les habitants de notre île. Pourtant, le français continue à faire partie intégrante de l'histoire de Jersey, de notre Assemblée, je dirais aussi, et de son identité. On n'est pas obligé à avoir une concurrence entre les langues différentes qu'on parle, y compris le français. À mon avis, on peut voir plutôt des opportunités pour les langues, de même que les cultures qui s'enrichissent mutuellement. Sur cette journée de la francophonie, je dirais, vive dans le plurilinguisme et vive la francophonie.
Merci, Monsieur le Président de l'Assemblée parlementaire de la francophonie, pour votre déclaration. Maintenant, il y a 15 minutes pour les questions en français ou en anglais. Now, 15 minutes of questions in French or in English. Connétable de Saint-Brelade.
Merci, monsieur. Je remercie le député pour sa présentation et lui demande s'il estime que le niveau d'enseignement du français dans nos écoles est suffisant pour permettre aux élèves de tirer le meilleur parti de notre situation géographique si proche de la France. Fera-t-il pression sur le ministre de l'Éducation pour qu'il intègre davantage de cours de français dans les programmes scolaires? And if I may, sir, just to put that in English, I thank the Deputy for the presentation and would ask whether he considers French being taught in our schools to be of sufficient standard to enable students to get the best from our geographic location so close to France. And will he be putting pressure on the Education Minister to include more French tuition in the school's curriculum? Thank you, sir.
Merci. Deputy.
Merci, Monsieur le Connétable. Merci, Monsieur le Connétable. I'll continue in English, but as I said in my statement, it's not a competition between languages, but I'm happy to also revert to French if any member prefers. I think the underlying premise of the question is basically correct. What I do want the message to go out, and I touched on it in my speech, I mentioned it deliberately, that we have a great, we should offer great gratitude to all of our teachers in Jersey for the great work they do, often under different difficult circumstances. And that includes language teachers who are facing, languages are facing competition from other subjects because they're optional. And we had a very contentious, but I think ultimately constructive debate that has moved the argument forward on that. So what I would like to focus on is actually that I think it's not so much the quality of teaching. I think we've got excellent teachers in languages in all of our schools, but actually that more students should be choosing languages for GCSE, even for A-level, and that I would like to send a message out to head teachers and that they should maybe consider encouraging and inviting multilingual people into their schools to talk about the value that languages can bring to both now and in the future for their students.
Deputy Miles.
Merci, monsieur. Aujourd'hui, nous rendons hommage à ceux et celles qui, par les écrits, les paroles, leurs idées, ont contribué à façonner la francophonie, à l'enrichir et à la diffuser dans le monde entier. Des grands noms comme Victor Hugo et d'autres sont des ambassadeurs de cette langue et de ses valeurs. Mais la francophonie ne se limite pas à une simple langue. C'est aussi un espace de dialogue entre les peuples, un lieu d'échange où la diversité des cultures est une richesse. C'est cette ouverture à l'autre, ce respect mutuel, cette volonté de faire entendre toutes les voix qui nous pousse à œuvrer pour un monde plus juste, plus inclusif et plus respectueux des différences. Alors la question, comment Jersey pourrait-il lancer une initiative permanente pour renforcer les liens avec la francophonie au-delà de cette journée? In English, today we're paying tribute to those who, through their writings, their words and ideas, have contributed to shaping the francophonic world, enriching it and spreading it throughout the world. Great figures like Victor Hugo, among others, serve as ambassadors of this language and its values. But the francophonie isn't just about language, it's also a space for dialogue between people, a place of exchange where cultural diversity is a source of wealth. It is this openness to others, this mutual respect, and this commitment to making all voices heard that drives us to work harder towards a fairer, more inclusive world that respects our differences. And therefore the question, how could Jersey launch a permanent initiative to strengthen its ties with francophonie over and above today?
I thank the Deputy for her question. We think of English and French being so different, but so many of the words that we see are the same. So the two words I've got here are renforcement and développement, so to reinforce what we've already got and to develop new links, perhaps. So I think what we have to recognise is that we've got a healthy starting point. I think we should reinforce the links that we have through our twinning associations, for example, that we have through the local section of the French Eisteddfod to develop festivals such as the French Festival, which is actually coming up this year for its 5th iteration, and to build on those links that we have with the region of Normandy, Brittany, and France more widely. But at the same time, I think we just need to have almost a shift in narrative in the way we think about our island, and that we shouldn't just look to the north, but we've got to look, as I've said before, to the south and to the east. We've got to actively seek out opportunities for economic development with our French counterparts, and that includes education. So I'd like a strong message from the Education Minister, for example, to go out that students can study in Rennes, they can study in Caen. If they're not entirely French speaking, they can go to Rennes and study business there if they want to, because English courses are available. And I think we've all got a part to play in that.
Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. Well, merci, monsieur. L'APF cherche-t-elle à soutenir notre langue maternelle, le jersiais, d'une quelconque manière, tout en soulignant ses similitudes et ses différences avec le français tel qu'il est parlé aujourd'hui? And to translate my bad accent, I'm asking if the APF is seeking to support our native language, Cherrier, in any way while highlighting its similarities and differences from French as it is spoken now.
Thank you.
Yeah. I was always reminded by a native Jerrier speaker who told me, you won't find a native Jerrier speaker who doesn't also speak French and English, so they're trilingual. And there's, of course, a key link between Jerrier, which is a Norman language, and French. And I think insofar as the APF's mission is to promote multilingualism more generally, definitely that also includes Jerrier. And I'm sure that when we host the conference in May, which is open to the wider membership of the Assembly to come and meet delegates from all over Europe, that we will make sure that we introduce them to some Jerrier. It was also a language which Victor Hugo appreciated when he came to the island, and he spoke very warmly of our Norman tongue, which exists still today in this island.
Encore des questions? Deputy Morel.
Merci, monsieur. Le député, il a parlé des accords entre les institutions éducationnelles. Je voudrais poser la question au député. Est-ce qu'il pense qu'il y a assez d'étudiants de Jersey qui utilisent ces accords et ces échanges? Et sinon, qu'est-ce qu'il dirait aux étudiants pour les encourager d'utiliser ces accords? I'm asking the Deputy whether he thinks, given that we have these agreements with education institutions in France, does he think enough Jersey students take part in these exchanges and these agreements? And if not, what would he say to students to encourage them to take part?
Merci.
Ultimately, this has to be about choice, so it's not about forcing students to go to one country or another to study or one institution, but I think it's about promoting the opportunities, highlighting what's available, and maybe also just highlighting the fact that these institutions, which are very well esteemed, are so close to us, and now we've got good links, I think, with France for transport. We've got a new ferry service. We've got links with Montfort Express as well, which I talked about, and if you want to be not too far from home, and maybe also the economic factor might be something that comes into play, because we need to look at what the fees are and how they compare, and ultimately that will be a consideration, I imagine, in student and parents' choices about where they go to study.
Deputy Kovac.
Merci. Je dis aussi aujourd'hui, vive la francophonie. Et la question, quel avantage Jersey a-t-elle en faisant partie de l'Assemblée parlementaire de la francophonie? Et quel avantage les députés pensent-ils que les membres de l'Assemblée tirent de leur participation aux conférences avec d'autres pays de la PF? And in English, what benefits does Jersey get from being part of the Assemblée parlementaire de la francophonie? And how does the deputy think the states members benefit from attending conferences with other APF countries?
Merci.
By having membership of both the Assemblée parlementaire de la Francophonie and the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, Jersey is really well placed. As I've said, it's not every parliament that has that opportunity, and it just opens us up to a whole new world, really, that exists, which is so important. There are so many countries, for example, in the East, which form part or are interested in Francophonie, and they see that really as a gateway to joining Europe, or to perhaps in some cases move away from Russian influence. And I also think that our part in that, as an island which is well placed centrally, literally in between the English-speaking world and the French-speaking world, is fundamental. And these conferences are so important for our CPD. I spoke to a couple of colleagues this morning when I came in and say, actually, it seems that kicking politicians is quite common these days, and we're unfortunately held in not the highest of esteem. But actually, if you look at the type of work we do and the reasons we go into politics, it's actually through meeting other politicians in different countries, other parliamentarians, that we get to share with them and realise that a lot of the challenges we face as an island are common challenges which often need global solutions, often delivered on, of course, on a local level.
Commentaire de Saint-Martin.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, pour ta présentation. Now I'll speak in English. Would the President of APF agree that it is highly important for a Canadian representative to join us for the 80th anniversary of Liberation, so that we can acknowledge in person their humanity in sending much-needed food parcels and saving lives during the occupation, and bearing in mind that they're under threat at the moment and need support, and that they are also a bilingual parliament? Thank you.
Merci.
I thank the member for her question. I think it's absolutely right that we do recognise the role that Canada played, in particular in the Vega bringing over food parcels to Jersey, but also the fact that they, like us, although they're a massive country, they also have that bilingualism that we perhaps aspire to as well. And I know that the Chief Minister, of course, has written to the new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, to congratulate him. And I would hope that, for example, we might be able to invite somebody from Canada, if that's not happened, and even if it could be somebody, an attaché from the High Commission, that could come to Jersey, and it would be wonderful if they could be part of our Liberation Day 80 celebrations.
Député Joseph.
Monsieur le Président, je tiens tout d'abord à féliciter chaleureusement l'engagement en tant de la présidente de la section jersaise de l'Assemblée parlementaire de la francophonie. La déclaration que nous avons écoutée, Monsieur le Président, illustrait avec justice la richesse de notre lien historique culturel et éducatif avec le monde francophonie. Ainsi, l'importance de maintenir vivant cette relation si précieuse, tant avec la France qu'avec d'autres pays, comme Monsieur le Président a dit. Je vous demande, est-ce que je me permets de demander à Monsieur le Président, dans le cadre d'être la fonction de l'APF, est-ce qu'elle a eu déjà l'occasion de rencontrer la présidente de l'Assemblée parlementaire de la Francophonie ou bien même la secrétaire générale de l'Organisation internationale de la francophonie? Parce qu'en fait, elle est rwandaise et il y a une tension que je comprends très bien, étant de la seule représentative de cette Assemblée qui a eu une responsabilité avec la francophonie dans le domaine des élections. Je souhaiterais me joindre à faire hommage à Monsieur le Président pour avoir l'opportunité de répondre à cette question en anglais si vous voulez. I've spoken in French, but I was just...
We know.
Yeah, but I understand, as the President has said, that more members might not be able to speak the language. So it's just appropriate I said I warmly congratulate the President on his speech. It was excellent, and all the other members that have spoken, like me, who have had the joy of learning French. And my question was, has he actually met yet the President of the APF and of the organisation, Organisation International of the Francophonie, because she is a Rwandese. And he mentioned rightly the tension that exists between Rwanda. It's something that I know very well about, having been one of this Assembly's only election observers for the Francophonie. And I understand the tension. I agree with it. I've not spoken about it before, but I understand whether or not he, in his work, might be able to speak with her, because I think that would do our relations the right thing, and to raise those concerns that are rightly made by other members, sir.
Thanks, sir. First of all, thank the Deputy for his question and also for his, long-standing support for Francophonie. I've spoken privately, separately with the Deputy about this. I've not met the individual in question. I have met the previous François Drouin, who was the President of the overall IPF, and I understand that the current Délégué Général is somebody called Amelia Lacrafi. I think he might be talking about the OEF president, but I'd be very helpful if the deputy could set up a link so we could have that wider conversation. Clearly, our Jersey's government relationship with Rwanda, the links with overseas aid, which are really important in that area, but notwithstanding the political sensitivities with the conflict there, I think should all be of great interest to us. And if Jersey can play any part in those conversations, I think that would be a welcome opportunity.
So, if I may permit a brief supplementary?
Yes. We are almost at the end of time, but yes.
If anyone ever...
No, you're the last member to wish to speak, so yes.
So, would the President agree that in those remarks he is reinforcing the world of diplomacy that can work so actively, us being both British and French, in the work that he is doing? I know he's got the External Relations Minister next to him. I know there's an event in Paris, and would he agree, finally, that this is an example of the quiet diplomacy that can go on, and he's doing, and maybe not spoken about much in this Assembly, but can go on and vive that, vive la France, vive Jersey et notre pluralisme de langage.
Merci.
So it's absolutely right that the learning that we have at the conferences is highly valuable, but also the conversations that we have when we're over a cup of tea, a cup of coffee with other delegates and who are also very well informed in their areas. And I remember, for example, a lot of the work of our section is focused on Europe, but inevitably we do get exposure to other countries. So I'll give a very quick example that when some of us attended the conference in Georgia, which was the plenary for the World Conference, you realise that all of a sudden how many Francophone countries there are in the world, and you also realise when you have Rwandan delegates sitting next to Congolese delegates, and then when tensions start to rise slightly, you realise, oh, this wasn't quite on my radar before, but actually the value of Francophonie, including the OEF, in their shared values, whether it's around democracy or human rights or economic growth and UN development goals, is highly important for us, and we're lucky to be part of that.
The 15 minutes allowed by standing orders has expired, but I think there is another question from Deputy Balash. Do you want to ask a question? Members content to extend the time? Yes, Deputy Balash.
Very quickly, until 20 years ago, the language of conveyancing in this island was French, and every transaction for the sale of land was completed in a document in the French language. And that ceased because, or one of the reasons why it ceased, was that there were insufficient clerks in Hill Street who were capable of understanding the French language. Would the President agree that unless considerable efforts are taken in the education sphere to encourage the development of fluency in the French language amongst our children, that these kind of exchanges that we have had this morning will be something to be cherished in the distant past?
So, I mean, I'm sure there's a line to be steered between pragmatism and actually respecting the fact that we're still a bilingual assembly and that French is a language of the courts as well, of course. And I think ultimately a choice needs to be made whether we reinforce our heritage, including French language. And I think one of the, or we just let it slide, because I could see, I hope this never happens, but I could see, you know, in a few years' time, it would only take a member of this assembly to say that French, we shouldn't be allowed to speak French anymore in the assembly. And I woke up maybe this morning thinking about, from a different angle, that we see ourselves as an English-speaking assembly, but we're actually a French-speaking assembly which allows English to be spoken, because that was the decision that was taken in 1900, and it's simply evolved since. So we are, à la base, nous sommes une assemblée francophone qui permet l'utilisation de la langue anglaise. So I think we should remember that, and maybe when government is recruiting to key roles in government at certain levels, that bilingualism, certainly an ability to speak good French, to write, read French, should be a requisite so that it actually filters down through the whole system.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. That completes that period of questions. Deputy Kovacs.
J'ai une autre question. Comment Jersey peut-elle utiliser son appartenance à l'APF pour élargir et améliorer ses relations avec les pays francophones? How can Jersey use its membership in the APF to expand and improve its relations with French-speaking countries?
So I think the starting point is that just by being members of the APF is that people know about us that wouldn't necessarily know about us either. They come to Jersey for conferences, they see Jersey delegates attending conferences. And just at this point, if I can say that when we get the usual easy attacks on us for travelling on conferences, because we're actually just doing our work, I think it's really important that we highlight the fact that, first of all, this is part of our job. And not only is it a way for us to develop ourselves and ultimately become better politicians and to serve the public better, irrespective of how long we're here for, is that actually, wouldn't it look very strange if Jersey started saying, we're not going to send anyone to these conferences because we don't think they're important and we're worried a bit about a bad headline in the local newspaper or on the local media. So I think it's really important that we value those links and that just by having conversations and knowing what's going on in other places, the shared challenges, and telling people about, because it actually works both ways. Sometimes we tell people about what we're doing in little old Jersey, and they actually think that's a great idea, and sometimes they copy us. So it can work both ways.
Encore des questions pour le Président? No? In that case, we return to the order paper with the Connotables and Saving.
Sorry, sir, may I raise the defo on Deputy Farnham?
Members content to raise the defo? Defo is raised. Move back to the debate on the reinstatement of senators, and the final amendment to be debated is the third amendment lodged by the Privileges and Procedures Committee. I invite the greffier to read the amendment.
Paragraph B, for the word 2026, substitute the word 2030.
Chair of PPC.
Thank you, sir. The speech I'm making today isn't the speech that I thought I was going to be making if it was yesterday afternoon. I'd just like to say that in Jersey we pride ourselves on good governance. The finance industry thrives on good governance. I think we'd all agree with this. And this amendment is all about good governance. Therefore, I was very disappointed in the Chief Minister's decision to send out his email yesterday. I feel that this is an attempt to undermine this amendment. It makes sweeping statements and places responsibility on PPC to work at speed to bring about something which should have been lodged earlier, to be achieved before the election year. It also ignores the fact that it's not the time that it takes to draft the law that is the issue, but the fact that we will have to debate this again during an election year. Oh, I wrote it quickly. And it also ignores the fact that it's not time to draft that is the issue, but the fact that we will have to debate this again during the election year. Isn't this now a government proposition? I am confused. Where was the consultation with this on PPC? Is there legislation which will be delayed as a consequence of this taking priority, and maybe very, very important legislation that will be delayed because we've decided that we're going to, arrange ourselves? Everybody in here would know that to do something like this, it was better to bring this proposition earlier rather than later. And I do know that when Deputy Miller, I spoke with her when she said that she was bringing this and it was lodged for February. And I know that I said to her that it would have been better if she'd brought this in February rather than March, because it would cause problems. So as I said, it is disappointing that the Chief Minister chose to intervene in this manner, but I hope that his intervention will not cloud members' judgment and they will listen to the arguments I'm about to put forward as to why this amendment is necessary. And this is not a wrecking motion or anything. This is all about good governance. In June 2022, following the last elections, the final report of the CPA BMIR Elections Observers Mission, EOM, was published. In that report, the EOM set out 14 recommendations to improve future elections in Jersey, the first of which was Recommendation 1, substantive amendments to the elections law should be adopted well in advance of the next election and never less than a year before. These bodies, CPA, EOM, the Venice Commission, are highly respectable bodies of high repute. The EOM also made reference to the Venice Commission, who set out clear guidance on regulatory levels and stability of electoral law, stating that it is not so much changing voting systems, which is a bad thing. They can always be changed for the better, as changing them frequently or just before or within 1 year of elections. The Venice Commission is not alone in its views. The International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, International IDEA, have published international electoral standards, guidelines for reviewing the legal framework of elections, such guidelines setting out that election legislation should be enacted sufficiently far in advance of an election date to provide political participants and voters with adequate time to become familiar with the rules of the election processes. Election legislation enacted at the last minute tends to undermine the legitimacy and the credibility of the law and prevents political participants and voters from becoming informed in a timely manner and about rules of the election processes. In lodging this amendment, the Privileges and Procedures Committee is not wishing to influence the Assembly's decision as to whether or not to adopt the main proposition. This amendment seeks only to ensure that if substantive changes are to be made, sufficient time is given to ensure that they can be implemented in accordance with internationally recognised best practice. But if we want to fly in the face of that, we can vote against it. Both the CPA and Venice Commission oppose changes to elections legislation in the year of a poll, and PPC does not believe that it is possible to implement the changes before June of this year, noting that the relevant legislation would have to be drafted and lodged for debate in an extremely short timescale. Whilst the constitutional change in submitting was the constitutional change in substituting one deputy in each constituency with a senator appears straightforward, the consequential legislative impacts are more complicated. It will no doubt be argued that legislation was able to be produced at speed during the COVID-19 pandemic, but emergency legislation should not be regarded as a precedent. Unlike the time-limited COVID legislation, this is permanent and underpins the island's democratic system. It cannot and should not be rushed. If this amendment is not adopted, we would inevitably be faced with a debate on the elections law in 12 months of the elections, and risk two outcomes. The first is that we would be ignoring the recommendations of two successive CPA election observers missions, an internationally recognised best practice, which would be damaging to us reputationally and would simply not be good governance. Secondly, and most importantly, we would be making major changes to the system in the run-up to the elections and risk further disengaging with the electorate, who in the Jersey Opinions and Lifestyle Survey 2022 cited lack of trust in the political system and lack of understanding of the electoral system as a reason that respectively 28% and 17% of the population do not vote. The Venice Commission proposes a solution to ensure there is a degree of stability maintained when electoral reforms are implemented. Another more flexible solution would be to stipulate in the Commission that if the electoral law is amended, the old system will apply to the next election, at least if it takes place within the coming year, and the new one will take effect after that. PPC agrees with the Venice Commission that the stability of the law is crucial to the credibility of the electoral process, which is itself vital to consolidating democracy. It is for this reason that it does not consider that such substantive changes should be brought into effect until after the next elections have taken place. If the Assembly adopts the main proposition unamended, the only way in which the relevant legislation can be brought forward in time for next year's elections will be at speed. This Assembly should make laws which have been prepared in a measured and thoughtful manner, especially when that legislation underpins the very democratic process by which we are elected to sit in this legislature. Notwithstanding the sterling efforts of the state's greffier and her legislative drafting team, it would be impossible to lodge draft amendments to implement this Assembly's decision in the 7 working days that we have left between this date and the 1st of April. 7 days before the 1st of April, which would be the last lodging date to ensure a debate before June 2025, a year before the next elections. The alternative would be that we work at considerable speed to lodge a draft as soon as possible, but inevitably this will be some way into the 12 months leading up to the elections. The impact of that should not be ignored. As I said previously, we would be deliberately going against the recommendations of 2 successive CPA election observers missions and widely regarded best practice in line with the Venice Commission. This Assembly prides itself on the membership of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, and we attend conferences, and amongst us several members have undertaken election observer training and participated in missions, and indeed have even led them. How can we say that we support the CPA, share its values, and are happy to be part of the observer missions into other jurisdictions, and yet reject as not relevant to the public one of the overarching principles which the CPA is included in both its mission reports? It is well documented that substantive changes to the elections law in the year of an election undermines public confidence in the process. We have a low voter turnout as it is. Why risk further disengaging the electorate by altering the system so close to the elections? This can only cause more confusion among the public, who already say that they have limited trust in the political system. And with all due respect, I do believe that some people do not appear to grasp the complexities of law drafting and how long things take to come to fruition. I mentioned earlier about COVID legislation. That was pushed through urgently to meet a pandemic as a necessity. Back then, we had a duty to create legislation at speed to protect Irelanders' health. This time we have a duty to protect Irelanders' democratic rights. The difference is that we do not have to adopt knee-jerk responses. We can and we should take time to ensure the relevant legislation is not rushed and we are making the right law for Jersey's future elections. If it is the will of this Assembly to reinstate senators, then it should do so properly and take care to ensure the legislation is as robust as possible. This will take more than 7 days. I urge this Assembly to accept PPC's sensible amendment and just would like to repeat that we do all pride ourselves on good governments and we shouldn't pick and choose when we have it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Is the amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I totally agree with the chair of the Privilege and Procedures Committee about the importance of good governance. And the PPC, as we call the Privileges and Procedures Committee, is to propose its next round of changes to the electoral system on April Fool's Day. And these, we have been told, will be largely administrative. If this is correct, they will not be proposing the single transferable voting system that the 2012 report to the Electoral Commission presented as a solution to a structural flaw in the current arrangements whereby this current States Assembly is constituted, a flaw that was not disclosed by the former PPC when presenting its proposals to the States Assembly 4 years ago, or at least not when I've actually read, from what I've actually read so far. The other solution highlighted by the report are single-member constituencies, although the retention of the constables in the states without a fractional voting arrangement makes this unworkable in terms of voter equity. I certainly am aware of no consultation by the PPC states members of even the possibility of introducing a single transferring voting system to address what was described as an important disadvantage in the report to the Electoral Commission. And given the novelty of such a concept, I have to accept it is too late to bring one before the next election. I do not recall there being a consultation by the PPC with states members about how well the last set of changes have bedded in over this term. And I do believe it was actually saying at the last time that the possibility of reintroducing states members into this Assembly, that was something it was looking into. Deputy Miller's proposition may not solve the inherent voter inequity problem with the current system before the next election either. But it does at least go some way towards reversing an injustice that can be associated with the current arrangements before the next election and to reduce a skewed outcome that results from it. Because the bringing forward of P139/2020 by the former PPC was not the way things should have been done, not in my opinion at least. The lack of scrutiny and challenge of the PPC for its lack of full disclosure of the nature of the complexity of the arrangements, of the important disadvantage that is embedded in this system. The lack of disclosure was not the way things should have been done either. The political opportunity it gave to political parties seeking to exploit any political opportunity they can and have been given to further their game also was not highlighted either. The current system was advocated by the former PPC chair, former Deputy Russell Laby, despite a report to the Electoral Commission pointing out an important disadvantage for independent candidates. Multi-member super constituencies can be easily manipulated by political parties to produce an imbalance in their representation in the States Assembly. I shared the 2012 report produced by the University of Reading with States members earlier this week, in case some of them weren't aware of it. It said, multi-member plurality has three important disadvantages. Firstly, it can seriously misrepresent opinion. If groups of voters tend to vote for the same set of candidates, the largest group can secure all the representation, even if it is in the minority of the population as a whole. And these groups might be political party or ideological, geographical, in other ways. Second, as a corollary, not the word I can easily pronounce, sorry, sir, of the first point, multi-member plurality can lead to a large number of wasted votes. Oh, and it's an effect that is likely to depress electoral turnout. Heavens. Third, multi-member plurality can do a bad job of choosing the most popular candidates, as vote splitting between candidates with similar constituencies can allow a less popular candidate through. So, the former PPC, with Deputy Russell Labby as its chair, and I can see Deputy Alvis squirming a bit in front of me, she was its vice chair.
So can I just raise a point of order? What's this got to do with the amendment that we're talking about?
Sir, I am pointing out an important disadvantage in the current arrangements which cannot be glossed over easily, and why there is reason for bringing these amendments through now. I hope that explains.
So we're debating the date.
Yeah, one at a time.
This is why it should not be delayed, sir.
Deputy Scott, is the speech you've made about STV and various voting methods, is that connected to the amendment that the Assembly is now considering?
Sir, it responds to the speech of the chair of the PPC justifying the amendment, and I am responding to that speech and the amendment, sir.
Well, I think it's very important that what you say is connected to the amendment, and the fact that a member may have said something not relevant to the amendment in their speech, I'm not saying they did or they didn't, does not justify another member making a speech that's not relevant to the amendment. It must be relevant to the amendment.
Sir, I totally accept the rules and their reasons.
All right.
Sir, the actual non-disclosure, an important basis, a thing that actually affects the actual equity in this Assembly, does affect the reason why this States Assembly may choose to not accept the PPC's recommendation. Thank you, sir. And I'm not going to speculate on the reason for non-disclosure. I do note that the former PPC chair, who had been an independent, lost his seat in the following election, unlike the PPC vice chair. We can see the imbalance that the current system produces with our own eyes. Close to 20% of the seats in this States Assembly are occupied by Reform members, and this might be described as a distortion of political power. Ironically, the former Chief Minister seems to have supported, on the last time this amendment was brought, a proposition of this nature was brought, she supported this continuance of political power when she last voted in the debate to restore senators. At the roadshow I attended in St Peter and St Brelard, the audiences did not welcome the changes. Might the electorate have been wiser than the states members representing them? In this case, possibly so. Some states members are asleep on the job. Some states members were not taken through the complexities of the current arrangements by the former PPC. I happen to be particularly bruised by the outcome, because there were times when I sought the support of Reform members. The vice chair of the scrutiny panel I chaired and reform members who were members of the former Scrutiny Liaison Committee. Despite the social justice sought by many of their objectives, I believe their pursuit of political ambition to be hyper-focused and ruthless. So exactly what has the PPC done to address the imbalance of power this current system produces so far, so that it can be addressed before the next election? Is there any evidence that it actually has recognised this or cared about it? Now, in the early days of this States Assembly, while many States members celebrated diversity, change, and the election of our first Chief Minister, members of a political party immediately put themselves forward as scrutiny chairs, uncontested in 3 cases. And we know we all dislike uncontested elections. And Deputy Luce and I were the only independents among 6 scrutiny chairs, hardly representative of the number of independents in the States Assembly, because some independents were holding out as, perhaps, I mean, that could be a reason, holding out for assistant ministerial positions at the time. And in response to an oral question, I've asked the chair of the PPC as to whether she would be looking to address this, to address the timing of assistant ministers' elections. I recently found it was not followed up. This was an opportunity to address an imbalance, political opportunity.
Conatava St Martin.
Point of order, sir.
Yes.
This has actually been followed up by PPC.
Sir, that's just addressing a person across. There's a point
Yes,
of clarification
so
possible,
when a
but
point
you
of order is
can't just
taken,
address across.
when a point of order is taken, the person speaking must sit down. That's you.
Yes, sorry.
Deputy Scott, you must sit
sorry,
down
sir.
now. Yes, Conatava of St Martin. What's your point of order?
Our point of order is that we have looked at this in PPC and it's an ongoing piece of work.
Yes, I'm not quite sure what's the point of order.
Well, she just accused us of not doing anything about it.
Yes,
Sir.
I think the point, Deputy Scott, I know you've explained why it is you're saying what you're saying, but in my judgment, what you're saying is simply not relevant to the amendment. The amendment is dealing with whether or not the changes, if any, to the, as was proposed by the proposition, should be delayed until 2030 for the reasons set out in the report. In my judgment, what you're saying to members with respect is not relevant to the amendment. It's simply not relevant to it.
Thank you, sir. I note that the reasons why I've actually explained why this may be of particular importance for the States Assembly to rectify right now, rather than to delay till 2030, is not accepted by you. I also will mention that the answer to the written question that I received from the PPC most recently about this matter, about the assistant ministers, contained an apology for the fact that the chair had not pursued the matter. What I'm really saying is that the only possible card on the table for members to counter this position is the proposition we have now. And if it's to be done as soon as possible, that does mean that it be implemented before 2030. Now, if the political tide, I mean, we have had information from the Chief Minister. I see that it's disputed by the PPC. My position is that if the political tide is turning, if members wish to seek this important disadvantage in the absence of proposals having been brought by the PPC, then the PPC must swim with it. There's only so much states members can accept in the pursuit of justice of voters at the expense of other values that also are important for voters, then it still will be within the timetable set for it, which remains within the period recommended by the Fairness Commissions. The actual proposition is simple. I don't believe that there is much room for amending the legislation that reflects it. I'm not, of course, seeking to embarrass the chair of the PSC or even seeking a vote of no confidence against her. And I apologise that I have to raise this, but what I'm saying is I do not accept the PP's position on this matter for the reasons I have given. I would submit it is the task of the PPC to support the democratic will of the members of this State's Assembly, not to seek a delay that will continue to support arrangements that favour a small proportion of its members, depriving all voters of greater say over who is in government. I therefore urge members to reject this proposition.
Sir, can I ask a point of clarification?
Are you prepared to give way?
Yes, of course, sir.
Yes, Deputy Renner.
Thank you, sir. Deputy Scott has made a point about the multi-member plurality and the unfairness of that system in terms of multi-member constituencies. Does she accept that the P2 institutes multi-member plurality for the senators?
Yes, Deputy.
So I accept that this, and I was intended to address this in the speech, my main proposition, but I accept that this speech doesn't, the current proposition doesn't fix the continuing disparity between the electoral districts created by a democratic decision to have the constables in the State's Assembly. I've raised possible ways of addressing this. I have come up with an idea. The report to the Electoral Commission suggested something, and it's not been addressed.
Deputy Miles.
Thank you, sir. I think it's fair to say that my reaction when I read this amendment was one of surprise. If this Assembly decides 15 months before the next general election to reinstate senators, I think the public would expect that decision to be enacted in time for the next election and not at a subsequent election in 5 years' time. And the public would be absolutely right to have that expectation. There's simply no need to wait until 2030 to implement this change if it's agreed by the states. Indeed, a decision to wait until 2030 would do our reputation as Assembly no good at all. 5 years to remove one deputy from each electoral district and substitute 9 senators is simply not credible, in my opinion. I've had many years of experience working with the Legislative Drafting Office, and I know that they're a very capable and professional team. They also have plenty of experience of working on amendments to the electoral system, so this isn't a new topic for them to get their heads around. To be honest, I had taken it as a given that the required legislative changes could be considered by the states before the summer recess, hence my surprise at seeing this proposition. That doesn't require the legislation to be rushed. It is a reasonable time frame for delivering changes that would be required. There wouldn't be time for feet to be dragged, but I think the Assembly and the public can expect that if decisions of this Assembly are taken, then it will be a priority for them to be delivered. So I was pleased to see the email from the Chief Minister yesterday evening confirming that the work would indeed take around 3 months, which would mean a debate on the legislation in June or July, as long as PPC and the GREF pursue this in a timely manner. And I have no doubt that they would do so. I had no doubt that they would do so. Yes, royal assent would then need to follow, but there's no jeopardy for receiving royal assent. The democratic decision will have been made. Given that the initial decision would have been made in March 2025, and then hopefully confirmed in June or July 2025, I think the public, election officials and candidates will have ample time to prepare themselves to what is to come in June 2026. Waiting until 2030 effectively means that this Assembly isn't taking a decision at all. It's abdicating its role and passing the responsibility to the next Assembly. That's not what I was elected for, sir. We carry the baton and we take decisions and see those decisions implemented until that baton is handed over and taken from us. I couldn't really explain with a straight face to the voters of St Brelard that this change needs 5 years to be implemented, and I'll therefore be voting against this amendment.
Thank you, Deputy. Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. And very pleased to follow the speech of Deputy Miles. So when I awoke this morning, the sun was streaming through the window, and I leapt out of bed with a spring in my steps, and I want to start on a conciliatory note with my good friend, and I hope she still is my good friend, the Constable of St Martin, and the chair of the Privileges and Procedures Committee, because I simply did not intend to cause any problems, just was seeking to be helpful with the email I sent to States members yesterday late afternoon on the back of questions and some concerns or some claims raised during the debate on the amendments that we simply wouldn't have the time to deal with the legislative requirements of this proposition, sir. And if I may, just in case any members didn't get a chance to read the email, I'll just read it to States members for clarity. I wrote, sir, "Dear colleagues, after questions were raised by some members in the States earlier in the debate, I wanted to clarify the legislative timeline should P2 be approved. Following discussions, it has been confirmed by officials and the law drafting office that the necessary drafting work would take approximately 3 months, depending on the option approved by the Assembly. Therefore, if the states decide to support the proposition to bring back the island-wide mandate, the necessary legislation could be ready for debate before the summer recess. I have been assured that this is possible, subject, of course, to prompt action by the PPC and the States Gref, who would need to ensure a timely turnaround of the draft law. Something, sir, I'm sure they would do on the back of a state's decision. The Legislative Drafting Office have also advised that they would be able to make arrangements to accommodate this piece of legislation, and government officials would support as necessary to ensure our legislative programme allows for this. The Privy Council meets once a month to approve laws, so the change would be in place later this year in ample time for the election in June 2026, sir. And I finished. I hope this is helpful. And that's what it was meant to be, sir. A helpful email to assure members had the facts in relating to the timing. I'd also like to remind members that the Venice Commission and other similar bodies are well respected and well regarded, but they provide guidance. They provide guidance, and in their guidance, they are clear that they accept that there are many different types, shapes, and sizes of jurisdictions. There are logistical challenges in large countries with small populations, and there are challenges in small countries and islands with larger populations. So they say, and they always say, they expect to see differences and circumstances and instances where jurisdictions will need to work outside their guidelines, which is what they are, their guidelines and recommendations. And we tend to align with those recommendations on some things, but not others. We tend to align with them when it suits us. I think voter equity is important. I think voter influence is perhaps more important in our island, the way it's made up, with parishes and districts, and previously the island-wide mandate to provide that balance. Yet some members will, and I don't criticise at all in members' views. We all have strong views about this for our own reasons, but we will champion the Vienna Convention's causes when it comes to equity or in relation to senators, which was arguably the office that was elected most equitably across the island. To defer that or to vote against that, whilst actually strongly supporting, as I do, retaining the office of constable, which is probably, when it comes to voter equity, the most inequitable. So we do, sir, tend to pick and choose. And sometimes we put that above the principles we try to serve when looking at guidance from such things as the Venice Commission. What I will say, sir, is that, I think Deputy Miles hit the nail squarely on the head. We are making a decision now some 15 months before the next election. And as I explained in my email, after obtaining advice from officials both in my department and the Law Drafting Office, we have ample time to do that. But if we don't, sir, I actually can confidently say, sir, that it is my firm belief that whilst the reintroduction of the island-wide mandate might not see a massive resurgence in voter turnout at the next elections, we will see a further decline because we have disenfranchised more islanders in the electoral process, something that all the work we have done, previous PPC committees have done, changing election days and dates, times of year, has all been aimed at increasing voter turnout. And I think, despite those best intentions, we have spectacularly failed. And we all know that the date and style and timing of the election is not the panacea to resolve that. It's the way we all interact and act in here, and how we start making islanders feel more confident that their voices are being heard. So this, the decision on the island-wide mandate is being made, and now we shouldn't be seeking to tie the hands of the next Assembly, because actually if we do agree to defer to 2030, that is tantamount to nullifying completely the proposition, because I'm sure that a new Assembly will simply want to redebate or debate other types of electoral reform. We're not sure how the new PPC or the new makeup of the Assembly will want to deal with those challenges, sir, and we should not be seeking to tie their hands by deferring this, by kicking this down the road to 2030. I think that actually defies the whole intention of the main proposition, sir, and I would urge members not to support it, sir. And while I'm up, sir, could I just ask, I'm presuming this amendment still requires a majority of 25, given it's seeking to change the main proposition, so your clarification
It does,
would be
yes.
helpful.
It requires 25.
Chief, would the Speaker give way?
I'd also like to ask for clarification as well, sir.
Yes, sir.
You'll give way to
Give way
Deputy
for
Ozer?
points of clarification to Deputy
Yes.
Ozer and Deputy Meze.
So the Deputy in this capacity, or Chief Minister in this capacity, said that the proposition was tantamount to negating the proposition. And I wondered why he was saying that, because that would have been a contravention of standing order, sir, which you wouldn't have allowed through your officers the amendment to be brought. And I would just ask the Chief Minister kindly to evidence why it is a negation, because it's a serious issue which wouldn't be, which in other words, sir, if it's true, then it wouldn't be allowed. Am I right or wrong? And maybe I could have a ruling from the chair as to whether or not this is a negation.
Well, it's not, and it's been approved for lodging it, and it'll be debated upon and voted upon in the usual way.
So the Chief Minister is incorrect in what he's saying?
Well, he may have meant it in a political sense, not a standing order sense. But I'm not going to answer for him. That's a matter for him.
Maybe that's a matter for him, but maybe he could confirm that, in fact, he should not be saying such a matter in terms of its properness.
May I reply, sir?
Yes.
I was meaning it in a political sense, sir, not in a standing order sense. But in the context of what I said, and I stand by that, sir, if the Assembly were to approve this amendment to push this to 2030, I believe this amendment would this proposition would never be delivered, sir. It would be redebated and would interfere with the new Assembly's view on electoral reform.
Yes, Deputy Meze.
Thank you, sir. In his speech and referring to his email, the Chief Minister repeated the line, the Legislative Drafting Office has also advised that they would be able to make arrangements to accommodate this piece of legislation, and government officials would support as necessary to ensure our legislative programme allows for this. Could the Chief Minister clarify what arrangements they would need to make to accommodate this, given that I'm presuming they were already intending to be very busy for those 3 months and something would have to give to enable them to have capacity to make those arrangements?
Chief Minister.
Yes, sir. Well, I'm not exactly sure at the moment. We'll leave that to officials, but we have set in place a legislative law drafting programme, which is constantly changing. And I think ministers will know that there are areas where law drafting, for some law drafting is delayed, some is changed, gaps appear, sir. So there is leeway in the schedule to allow for this legislation to be drafted, sir.
So I don't think that cuts the mustard. He said we could leave it to officials. Well, we can't, sir. We're in a parliamentary debating chamber without officials able to speak. I've certainly not been asked to delay or move anything from my legislative agenda, and I'd say no if I were given the chance. So who has offered to change their legislative agenda to accommodate this?
Yeah, sorry, sir. I will be clearer, sir. Depending on the outcome of this debate, sir, officials will be asked to look at the legislative programme, sir, and come back to the Council of Ministers, I presume, sir, because it is down to, I think, the ministers to us agree how we wish to manage that legislative programme. Right now, sir, knowing that there are some gaps, some potential gaps appearing in the legislative programme, while some have been filled with requests from other ministers, sir, at this moment in time, I firmly believe there will be the space to allow for this, sir, but I will make sure that ministers are consulted and content with what is proposed. Sir. Now, that might mean in the housing minister's case he's not prepared to defer any important legislation, but I know there are other ministers, sir, that would be prepared to do that, depending on, as I said, the outcome of the debate.
Thank you, Chief Minister. Do you want to speak, or are you asking the Minister to deal with the question?
Point of clarification, please, if I might.
Prepared to deal with the point of clarification? Are you prepared to deal with the point of clarification?
Yes, I am, sir.
Yes, Deputy Wilson.
Thank you, sir. Could the Chief Minister clarify whether or not his priorities have changed?
Chief Minister.
In relation to what, sir?
In relation to the common strategic priorities and the legislative programme underpinning that.
Chief Minister.
No, sir.
Thank you, Chief Minister. Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. And I think, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, the point of clarification perhaps have stolen the thunder where I was going. And it's a bit of a disappointment. Unfortunately, the Chief Minister has walked out the room. Because...
he's back.
He can have a coffee later, sir. But it feels like that the general message from the Chief Minister here is when there's a will, there's a way. But I want to frame that in kind of, well, does that apply to everything that happens in this Assembly? Deputy Mezek highlighted in his request for a clarification the words the Chief Minister shared yesterday. The Legislative Drafting Office have also advised that they would be able to make arrangements to accommodate this piece of legislation. And government officials would support as necessary to ensure our legislative programme allows for this. In the frame that, in the kind of the context that the Chief Minister has positioned his 2-year government, he said, I'm sure, that the kind of the words he would describe things is prioritisation, and he hopes for delivery. And something has to give here. I took down what he said. He said gaps are appearing in the legislative timetable. I think that's news to members who aren't in the Council of Ministers. I thought that this really was a legislative timetable that had to meet the kind of the bandwidth of a team that is already stretched, and that decisions have to be made. And I'm just trying to think over the last, coming up on 3 years now, the number of backbencher propositions that have come, but ultimately have been failed to be delivered either from government resource or from the resource of the legislative drafting team, which of course has a huge amount of work to do across ministries and that of the aims of backbenchers. And the kind of view by the Chief Minister that, well, this is what PPC have said, but we can make this happen. It just feels a little kind of unbalanced here, because backbenchers bring propositions, and the first thing a minister may often do, I think often quite rightly, is say, hold on, we see where you're going, but we need time and we need realistic timetables. And the backbencher gets a bit frustrated. They go, no, I want it done now. And the ministers go, hang on, we've got to prioritise, we've got to balance everything and our workloads. And so what they often do is they propose an amendment to the words. And they will say, well, look, we've got the benefit of a large team of officials who can advise us. And we're trying to work on an amendment that could pass. And here we have the Privileges and Procedures Committee, who are acting as a committee that I'm sure is apolitical on the matter here. And I see the chair nodding. This is an apolitical amendment saying, we hear what the backbencher has brought, in this case, Deputy Miller, but hold on. We are offering advice. We need to balance. And I feel the balance meets exactly what the Chief Minister wants, which is to prioritise delivery. If he can assure this Assembly that important legislation is not delayed, that there haven't already been attempts to prioritise and limit what the ambition of ministers is to deliver legislative change, then maybe we could fit this in. But already, in point of clarification, he's not come forward with that. And he highlighted to the Housing Minister, well, maybe the Minister is not willing to give any leeway to, and he said, to defer important legislation, but other ministers may be happy to. Happy to defer important legislation. Well, by its name, that's important, and I think that's what the island expects us to be here to deliver. Many members have said here, why are we debating ourselves? Why are we talking around ourselves? We have a lot to deliver, and I'm sure the Chief Minister agrees. So I'd really like, unfortunately he can't reply to this, but I'd like him and the ministers who have a lot to achieve, the backbenchers that have ambitions to request from ministers, from our legislative drafting team, to consider that. And I won't spend much longer because our job really is to get back to the business of the Assembly, which isn't this proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on this amendment? Deputy Felton.
Thank you, sir. I was prompted to rise to speak actually after listening to the concerns raised by Deputy Scott. I think that reminded me of the importance of the timeline of scrutiny. And the importance, and one thing that hasn't been mentioned so far in the debate on this amendment is the time that will be required to scrutinise what is very, very important legislation. And I just wanted to raise that because in order to allay the fears of Deputy Scott and perhaps some other members that the legislation may not be as strong as it needs to be, I think it's really important that we acknowledge that allowing the time for proper scrutiny of legislation is incredibly important, and perhaps the chair of PPC could clarify that it would be, I believe, the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel that would be responsible for undertaking that piece of scrutiny. I will also, while I've got the opportunity to put it on record as Minister for Social Security, that I would not be seeking to delay any of my important legislation in order to accommodate this piece of work.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on this amendment? Deputy Ozef.
Sir, I rise to speak in support of the PPC amendment because it is, frankly, something that seems to be being set aside by members, including the Chief Minister. And I am somewhat horrified to hear that there is an acceptance, a glib acceptance, that there should be somehow a reordering of government priorities, which this Assembly has already agreed on. I have not been made aware by any minister that they're going to be bumped from the legislative draft. Many of the constituents I have spoken to are wondering what this Assembly in its term of office has actually achieved. And so we're going to have achieved less, even less, and I wish ministers well in achieving things by the end of the term so that we can all go to the electorate, which all cast us with the same brush. There's not a wide understanding, quite understandably, of states members, whether they be in the executive or the non-exec, because we're all important, we're all individuals, apart from a party, but that's fine too. Two parties, sorry. I think that it is absolutely vital that we recognise that changing the structure of our Assembly, as the previous speakers have said, must be done properly. And that doesn't mean with political expedience, sir. The Chief Minister can speak politically. He's always stood in this Assembly and wanted to keep senators. Well, that's fine, but he mustn't use his position as the Chief Minister to effectively make something happen because he and some of his government want to do so. I also call to mind, and I know that there's been some legal advice, but the legal advice is of one opinion. I've looked in, as I know other members have looked into, the ECHR and the Venice Convention and the interplay between the two, and I think that it is careless, frankly, sir, to disregard international standards. We've got the mover of the original proposition absolutely wedded to international standards in the financial services industry. There is no international standard that must not be adhered to in terms of financial services. We've seen the problems in our finance industry that has resulted from it. And here we have the same individual basically simply saying, no, it doesn't matter, and supported by the Chief Minister and no doubt the External Relations Minister as well. I'm absolutely horrified. The guidance is not arbitrary. We risk doing what we've done before. And I ask the mover of the proposition, I don't know whether forgive me if she's spoken in this amendment debate, but I'm afraid that they had their chance, sir, 6 months ago. They could have brought this proposition. I'm fully aware that the External Relations Minister, when he was the Treasury Minister, brought forward in February 2013 a proposal to reinstate senators. It was rejected. That's what happens. He could have brought it back, and it could have been brought back in time. But it's not within time, and we know that. The law drafting offices apparently can accommodate it. No ministers, I repeat, have been given any idea of what's going to be removed. I think members need to be honest. This is not a green light from officials. It's a flashing amber light. We are being asked, sir, as far as I've heard, if we don't support PPC, who are, as we've said, they are the guardians of our parliamentary practice, with you accepted as the overlord. I'm going to make a comment about Speaker Weatherhall, but I won't. So the fact is that PPC are a balance between government and non-executive. They brought a proposition brought by a well-respected constable with a provenance of political service and all the rest of it. And she is saying, with her committee, that we need to debate, that we need to make sure that this is done in 2030. We've heard debates about, and why is that really important? We've heard the debates yesterday about the problems, and the Social Security Minister rightly pointed out that there's going to have to be scrutiny. We're not scrutinising things anymore. We're just going to let something that gets passed by this Assembly just waft into, like magic, into law with none of the parliamentary principles that we have to stand by. And we know that we're bad at law drafting scrutiny, but no, it's going to be fine, so apparently, for the Chief Minister to say, look, whoosh it goes, off to the law draft, and then we're going to have
clarification, Deputy Scott.
Sorry, sir.
I'm not going to give way, sir.
Okay.
I'll give way at the end of my remarks.
Yes.
Those also are, I think, going to send the message that it's not about voter equity. We don't care about that. We're just going to shovel in a changed voter system without respecting what are the considered opinions that have been debated endlessly in this debate about changing equity. Deputy Scott, wisely yesterday articulated by Deputy Curtis, pointed out all of the problems that are underlying this, frankly, abandonment of principles in terms of voter equity. It's really problematic. And by the way, the other message that's going to be going out is that we're not putting off this issue, we're going to be putting off all the issues that the people are expecting this Assembly to deal with. Housing, health, cost of living, competition reform. I'd like to see the Competition Authority have its legislation updated. Apparently there wasn't any room so in the legislation. Cost of living is rising. It's the biggest issue that I come across with people on the doorstep. They're saying, what are you doing talking about senators? We don't want senators, we want you to get on and do something. Those are what I am hearing on the doorstep, sir. Time again. I haven't had a single person tell me they want senators. Not one. I have had people telling me that they want, well, I must be speaking to two different things. So it must be because I have a parish with my constable and the other deputies that is the microcosm of Jersey. We've got basically, we've got social deprivation, we've got very wealthy residents, we've got beautiful farmlands there, we've got French speakers, we've got all sorts of people there. And actually, I think that St Saviour is a representative place. It's the microcosm that all stratas of society, with terrible voter turnout in Georgetown and that area around there, and those people have welcomed the fact that I've been down there and seen them with my other deputies. They've seen a political representative. They haven't heard from a political representative, it seems, for a while. But they've got a deputy and deputies and a constable that's doing something for them. And what we're going to do is send out a message that we're actually going to just play with ourselves and basically want to have our egos risen because we're going to have our senatorial elections. I am very concerned that the Council of Ministers is rather split. That's true. So we've got a bulldozer effect going through our legislative programme, which is going to make our people's priorities a problem, a delivery. I've been a senator, sir. I've been in this assembly when the senators used to sit there. We used to sit there, sir. And frankly, it didn't matter whether there were senators here or not. It didn't make any difference. What the public want is outcomes. Outcomes that change and improve their lives. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to not speak for the full allocation of my time. I'm going to try and urge members to support the proper, considered, balanced, independent, thoughtful proposal of the mover of this proposition. Let us return to real work the public sent us here in 2022 to do. Let's not spend any more time debating in this part of this assembly, talking about ourselves, because I don't think the island, I haven't seen one opinion poll, not one piece of research that this is going to be an urgent priority for people in 2030. It is not, as far as the research I've carried on. Let us put a moment to prove that we are capable of putting democracy above self-interest of some parties and individuals. Let us put ourselves in the proper place where there should be proper legislative scrutiny, there should be proper respect for international standards, and there should be a proper mature debate, and let's have a debate about senators in the next election. I'm not allowed to have a prop, sir, but I got my senatorial badge there for when I was standing for senator, and I put an extra thing on it. It says, O's of not for senator in 2026. That's my position, sir. That's my position. I hope it's going to be actually never. But that's what will be for the main debate. I've been one. It doesn't make any difference what the public wants is outcomes. And I say well done to the chairman of PPC, and I hope that she will be taken seriously because she's acting in this assembly and this island's interest. Thank you, sir.
Sir, I had points of clarification.
Do you accept a point of clarification from Dr. Scott?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. In fact, I have two. First of all, the deputy suggested there would be no scrutiny. I just wondered if he accepted that the corporate scrutiny panel has a role in this and whether he's suggesting that they wouldn't be doing the work.
So I'm not on scrutiny. I don't really understand the question. Is the question about whether the corporate services panel, there isn't a minister, there is a panel. But I know that scrutiny takes time. I know that scrutiny takes time of legislative amendments of the most serious type. This is changing the constitution of the states. It needs to be consulted upon. It needs to be properly done. And I don't understand what the questioner is saying.
Thank you, sir. I notice the chair has already, or that panel already has spoken in this debate. Also, the point regarding the Jersey Competition Authority, which actually is partly within my ministerial remit. Has the deputy been working on a proposition seeking improvements? Because I notice it's not on the...
That's not relevant to this debate, sir, but absolutely there is I'm not the only one, sir. There's lots of people who are wanting the people's priority put into legislation. I'm looking at my Reform colleagues along the other side. They're trying to do things. Maybe people want to stop them doing some things. Democracy has its way. There's lots of things that need to be done. We've got a planning minister that's got problems. We've got lots of laws that we need to change to improve the people's lives. And this doesn't. Being a senator doesn't make much difference. If somebody's been a senator and says it's going to make much difference, they can please speak in this debate now. Thank you, sir. I don't think that was a relevant clarification point, sir.
Thank you. Deputy Benes, do you want to speak in due course, or do you want to ask a question of Deputy Joseph? Yes, thank you very much. Deputy Balash.
So in constitutional matters, due process is really important. We should not rush things through without allowing sufficient time for all the appropriate mechanisms of our procedures to be implemented. That means that we have to allow sufficient time for the drafting of this law. Experience tells me that it's very likely that there will be amendments to the law when it is drafted. Sufficient time must be allowed for the drafting of the amendments. And it seems to me blindingly obvious that it is going to be extremely difficult to have this law debated before the summer recess. It's possible, but it seems to me to be unlikely. And I look then at the Venice Commission guidelines, which are reported in the report of the Privileges and Procedures Committee. Election legislation should be enacted sufficiently far in advance of an election date to provide political participants and voters with adequate time to become familiar with the rules of the election processes. That's the international standard. Like Deputy Joseph, I would be really interested to know from the Minister of External Relations why it is that this particular international standard is not important and can be put on one side. When over and over again he comes to the Assembly and tells us that we have to pass this legislation and that legislation because we need to comply with international standards. I think, sir, that the amendment of the Privileges and Procedures Committee is a very sensible amendment. It doesn't judge the question of whether or not there should be a reintroduction of the island-wide mandate. It merely says that if it's going to be done, then let us do it in due time and with proper regard to due process, and that seems to me to be absolutely right.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Binet.
Sir, yeah, it would appear that Deputy Joseph has started his election campaign extremely early this year because he's hearing an awful lot of information on various doorsteps. I happen to stand in the same constituency as the Deputy at the last election, and contrary to what Deputy Joseph reports, an awful lot of people told me that they felt desperately disenfranchised by the changes that had been made, and I think it was probably the single most important thing for them to have the office of Senator reinstated. On a personal level, I think that elections and items of this sort are of great importance, and I think that we should prioritise them if the Assembly decides to take that decision. I don't often disagree with Deputy Balash, but on this occasion, so I think it's that important that we should put it as a top priority. Thank you.
Would the member give way, kindly?
Are you prepared to give way for a point of clarification?
With the greatest of respect to my colleague Deputy, who I know is very busy, and he said that, and he's working very hard, would he please just state there's a time difference between, and it's not an election now, but the election in 2022 was 3 years ago, and that opinions have changed, and is he aware of that now?
Is that a point of clarification or?
Spoke about would he say that it's up-to-date information is that is still relevant now because things have moved on?
I don't accept that at all, sir. I talk to an awful lot of people in the course of my work, probably more than I've ever spoken to in the course of my life. And I believe the sentiment is exactly the same as it was in 2022. I'd also make the point that a lot of older people take the time to go out and vote. If we wait another 5 years, some of those people, that may include me, may not have the opportunity to vote for senators again. So once again, I urge the Assembly to A, vote for it, and B, to proceed with it with speed if it passes. So, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Colin Talbot and Hellier.
Thank you, sir. And I'm going to start by saying that I will not be taking any points of clarification. And I have to say, maybe we are moving towards the sort of behaviour of the Australian Parliament, but the number of spurious points of order, I'm sure you have to deal with those in your own way, sir, but points of clarification, let us just have our speech and sit down, and then somebody else can make a speech. I think it's rather sad the way we've moved into this need to have second and third speeches. Anyway, to get back to the point, we're clearly moving into the main debate now. This is what we're basically trying to do. Some of us is to kick this into the long grass, to kick the can down the road. There's no question that if this is approved, what privileges and procedures are proposing, then that's basically it for senators, because the next Assembly will probably want to take a different view and may well want to redebate it. So we either accept that there is a need to have a senatorial election next year, or we don't. It's interesting that we obviously all talk to different people. I was pleased to welcome the Irish community, quite a lot of them, into the town hall on Sunday to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. And when I was speaking at the end of it and welcoming the guests from the embassy, I said that I would be bringing the guest to the States Assembly to show him and his wife the place where I have spent so much of my time. And I would be explaining the Jersey system, including the role of senators that was on the agenda for this week. And at this point, I just took a straw poll of those in the room. More than 100 of them, it's true, some of them had a Guinness or two. And I said to them, what's the view of the group? Who wants senators back? And probably about 70-30 said, we want senators. We want a chance to vote for some senators. And some members have been criticising the mover of the proposition or criticising the proposition itself for a lack of consultation. Well, Deputy Miller did effectively a roadshow around the parishes, not unlike the senatorial roadshow that it was my pleasure, along with the other constables, I think, to chair. And there's no question in my mind that back in the day when we had senators, that senatorial roadshow was a source of great interest, and it generated interest in the forthcoming election. So I think that members also, Deputy Balash was saying that we're sort of moving into uncharted territory, we're bringing in new provisions. This is an old provision for our democracy. We had senators for years. So we're going back, basically we're going back to having senators. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. This idea that's being promulgated in recent speeches that there's this huge impact on the law drafting program from effectively putting back senators into the mix for next year. So I would urge members, if you believe that the public want a chance to vote for senators next year, then reject the proposition from PPC. Where there's a will, there's a way. Law drafting time will be made. The matter will be brought back to the Assembly for scrutiny and for a debate. And I think there'll be a lot of very happy voters out there if we make that decision. That's my personal view. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Tadier.
And so it begins, the political opportunism. So we've heard a lot about the older generation, and they're clearly very important. And clearly, if you're a tactician when it comes to an election, you decide, and when we have our discussions, we decide about you have to decide, do you play to the electorate that already votes, or do you try and increase the votership so that the majority of people in Jersey don't vote? That's the reality of what we have at the moment. They didn't stop voting they didn't start voting when we had senators, and they didn't stop voting particularly when we didn't have senators. There are other deep-seated issues that I think actually the JEP today in its editorial, although it takes, I think, an unnecessary swipe at politicians saying that we're privileged, pale and stale, which I think is unfortunate and probably falls foul, arguably, of some of the anti-discrimination legislation. Other points that they make are actually quite valid about members needing to actually represent real issues, not be fixated on esoteric electoral systems that actually don't benefit people. And a few weeks ago, I asked a question to the Education Minister about what consultation there had been with young people about the changes to our electoral system. The electoral system that we seem to be intent on chopping and changing at a whim only after one election when the system hasn't had a chance to bed in. Because the focus on this whole debate has been on going back to the past. It's about an ossified system. It's about a system which is broken and always was broken in the past, and not about how we make progress, but how we make a two-step back rather than the step forward that we have made. And will we say to people that actually, because of course there was a tiny minority of people who don't like change. Look, let's be honest, look at who turned up to those parish meetings. If they're banging our doors down when we were supposed to be banging their doors down during the election period, of course they were saying, why are you changing it? And it's not because they necessarily thought that having an island-wide mandate was better for democracy. It's because it goes back to that fundamental point of human nature that humans do not like change. And I can't remember if it was in this term or in the last term, but I gave the analogy of my dad's beard. And I said that when my dad was younger, much before I was born, he came back home one day and he decided to grow a beard. And my grandfather said to him, Louis, that beard doesn't suit you, you should shave it off. But he kept coming for a few weeks, and after a couple of months, he had the established beard. And then one day, all of a sudden, he turned up and the beard was shaved off. And he said to him, Louis, why did you shave your beard off? It suited you. Now, this is what we're at risk of doing with this electoral cycle. We've only had one election. Was it so terrible that the results were not what we wanted, or were not what served the people? And the real truth is, when we go back to the electorate next time, and when potentially Deputy Binet is seeking re-election in St Saviour, potentially along with Deputy Ozef, they'll knock on the door and they'll say, there might be a younger generation of voters who voted for the first time at the 2022 elections and say, why do you keep changing it? We were just getting used to the new system, or this is the first election I voted in, and I've never had to vote for senators. Why are you asking me to vote for 3 members, which are all doing the same job, when I'm already actually trying to figure out why you insist on us voting for 2 different memberships? So the point is, with this, first of all, yes, it will be rushed. We had a desperate email, I thought, last night from the Chief Minister, who says, don't worry, we can do this. I've asked the law drafting people to prioritise this piece of work. Really? You're the Chief Minister. Surely he should be impartial when it comes to this issue. And I won't give way, so I don't think he's spoken yet. And saying that I've spoken to them and they can do this in good time. But actually, what's the consequence of that? Does this mean that other important governmental business, other law drafting that may be coming through from backbenchers potentially, is that going to be put on hold just so that we can rush something through? Wouldn't it be better actually to have a proper consultation with everybody, not just a handful of people around the parishes on a winter's night who might have come out because they already agreed with something? I want to know what people under 35 think about these electoral changes. The vast majority of people, as I've said, in Jersey don't vote, and in that particular section, that's even much more pronounced. So if we want to alienate our young people in the island, I say young, it's really anyone under 50, let's face it. Anybody who doesn't feel part of Jersey can also be included in that, because we want to play to a subsection of the already voting and well-connected parts of Jersey who do vote, then actually let's do that in a considered manner, because I want to know what they think. I want to know what people who don't vote think about our current system and what can be done to actually engage them. And remember, these are people who are registered to vote already. We're not talking about the many thousands of people in Jersey who don't bother registering to vote, even though they can. So the actual figure is much higher than it might be. So I think that actually there are very compelling reasons to take a pause here, because we don't want rushed legislation coming through. We all need to have a proper consultation, and that consultation period will ultimately be the next election, won't it? So many of us might be standing for re-election in 2026. There will be great opportunities for us to actually knock doors. And in fact, the irony is, the senators who are saying that we know what people want because we knocked on their doors, they won't be knocking on doors at the next election. It will be the deputies and the constables knocking on those doors, because constables will definitely have to face an election, even if it's against none of the above, which was not an easy task for some of them. All of them have been elected under the current system in the same way that the deputies were, obviously in a different way, but in an equally valid way, to bring them here, to give them that legitimacy. So I think it's, on balance, we're not here to make rush decisions. We do have a body that we've charged. It's called the Privileges and Procedures Committee, who have considered this matter. And that some of them, of course, might be supportive ultimately of bringing the island-wide mandate back. But as a body representing this Assembly, and if we don't have confidence in them, then, you know, a vote of no confidence should be forthcoming. But I've not seen that. I'm not suggesting it, because I do have confidence in them. It is a mixed body, partly elected by us and, of course, appointed by that set formula. Let's let them do their work. Let's listen to them. And then let's listen to the electorate and our constituents, not just the ones who shout the loudest on this, but all parts of our island, and see if we can have an enhanced system. Because, yeah, the last point, we do have a very representative system at the moment. So just to call out our friend in the gallery, it's not he's not the editor. But when we're told that we're pale and we're unrepresentative and that we're stale and we're privileged, like, I certainly feel a bit pale this time of year, but that's more to do with the fact that it's winter. And I joked in the coffee room that if we all turned up one day with very good tans, they'd probably also criticise us for not being pale. And of course, we do have members of the Assembly who aren't pale. And that's to be welcome. So I think we're getting into very dodgy territory, and it's the JEP who started this narrative. But the point is, we have an Assembly which has got more women in it than it's ever had, and more women. The majority of the deputies are women, and a significant proportion of the Assembly overall, including some very esteemed constables, are obviously of that gender. And that's not what defines us, but it does show the fact that we've all got different backgrounds, different experiences. And of course, that wasn't the case for senators, by the way. It was often a certain type of person who could stand for senator, somebody already with a high profile, often with good financial backing, either because they were wealthy individuals or they had a party that can back them. And that's, of course, what we'll see. So let's think about what the unintended consequences might be during that pause. And if it's still a good idea to bring senators back, the island-wide mandate back, after the next election, because that's the feedback that we have, we can do it in a much more considered manner and in a much more holistic way.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. Deputy Tadier said he wanted to hear from people below the age of 35, so I'm happy to oblige him whilst I still have that opportunity. And I'm also pleased to follow on before Deputy Tadier from the current version of the Constable of St Helier, who seems to flip-flop on this issue from cycle to cycle. And I would remind him, sir, that he is setting himself up to vote for a proposition that the data proves delivers worse voter equity for his parishioners in St Helier, and he can talk about his straw poll at one parish hall event, sir, but may I remind him that when there was a referendum on this subject, 86% of his parishioners voted against having senators in the electoral system, and a year later, his was the only parish that actually voted to remove the constables from the Assembly. So I have no idea what mandate he thinks he's pursuing with his positions in this debate, sir. Sir, if the legislation to implement P2 is ready for debate and approval by this Assembly before the summer, I will eat my hat. There is no chance of it, and the words that have been given to us by the Chief Minister simply don't stand up to scrutiny. Let's remember, sir, that we took 5 years to produce half a page of legislation to ban exclusivity clauses in 0 hours contracts. When I was Minister for Children, I was consistently told by my officers how difficult and complicated it would be to produce the legislation to ban discrimination against tenants with children. That ended up being half a page of legislation and took years to deliver. It is absolutely not as simple as simply going back to what law we had before 2022, copying and pasting it and implementing it this time. Because when the law was produced for the 2022 election, it, as well as changing the composition of the Assembly, also included lots of other relatively minor but important changes to make our election system smoother that you will not be able to easily transfer to the pre-2022 legislation. It's going to be a complicated exercise to do that, and, sir, an exercise that will be costly to us all if anything is gotten wrong in that process. If there's a line that doesn't quite work out properly, something that's missed, or one connection between this section and another section that just isn't quite there, the consequences can be devastating. So let's not forget that we discovered shortly after the 2018 election that most of us in this Assembly at that time had inadvertently broken the electoral law because we hadn't filled in our election expenses properly in accordance of the law. That was an entirely innocent mistake. None of us did that on purpose. It was based on the advice we got at the time, but it was wrong, and the election law had been broken, and what that must have done to have undermined faith in politics at that time. There is a cost to getting these things wrong. And that's not to say, sir, that if we're going to go at pace to try to get this legislation accommodated for as soon as possible, there are going to have to be things that are put aside in order to do that. And so I want to ask, and this is to ministers and backbenchers alike, who's volunteering to give up their time so that their priority can be cast aside for this? I can say, sir, when it comes to housing legislation drafting time, you can pry it out of my cold, dead hands. I ain't giving it up at all, because we have a housing crisis that ought to be a much greater priority than what we've now spent days debating in here ourselves, because some people want us to go back to the past, revert our electoral system to one that was, as the evidence shows us, was overwhelmingly unpopular. And a reminder to Deputy Binet, he can talk about the anecdotal conversations he had on the doorstep, but in his parish, when there was an actual vote on it, 83% of voters came out and voted against what he thinks is so popular in that constituency. But we can just ignore that evidence, sir, because we ignore what's inconvenient to us when doing this. So, sir, I ask members to consider who's going to give up what backbencher priority will we not be able to proceed with, and how often we hear those arguments when a backbencher brings a proposition and ministers have to stand up and say, oh no, we can't, no, we have to change the date for that, no, it can't be accommodated in this way because it's not possible. But lo and behold, on the basis of what the Chief Minister says, is he's been told, is they can simply make arrangements. Oh, great. Well, we can make arrangements for everything else then. We can make arrangements to sort out our healthcare system that's in crisis at the moment. We can make arrangements to deal with the growing inequality in the island. We can do it all, but when it comes to the reality of that, we're told we can't. But electoral reform, don't worry, we got it, we can do it. There are gaps that we can slip it in. So the reality here is that this won't be debated before the Assembly, before the summer recess. The chair of PPC raised two risks associated with not going ahead with her amendment. And I can tell her that there's a third risk involved in that as well, which is that which Deputy Balash raised. In fact, I'm actually regretting my choice of words there. It's not actually a risk, it's a certainty, which is that when the legislation comes through, there will be amendments to it, because some of us will not give up on the idea of voter equity and making our system fairer and more equal across the island in the face of some of those who would see us go backwards and make it more unfair for some of our constituents. So whatever decision we make today, if an iteration of P2 is adopted, whether it's before the summer recess or after, I think after, we're going to go through this exercise all over again with amendments, and it's going to be a complete unedifying mess. at least with the amendment from PPC, that gives time to make sure we've got it right, that every line in that legislation aligns properly, and we don't sleepwalk into an election where we end up falling over ourselves in the way that we have done previously, mistakes being made, forms not being filled out properly, election expenses not being declared properly. All of that undermines faith in our democratic process and frankly is an embarrassment. Let's do it and get it right, and let's vote for the amendment by PPC.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. Sir, with the greatest of respect, the Privileges and Procedures Committee, I will not be supporting this amendment. That will come as no surprise. I would like to remind everyone of the Attorney-General's clear and unambiguous advice yesterday as regards the Venice Commission and human rights aspects. And I'm not going to repeat that. And I would just like to, on the question of international standards and electoral mechanisms, if France decided to elect Marine Le Pen as Prime Minister or President, would we stop engaging with France? No, we wouldn't. If any country changed its electoral mechanism such that we didn't like, would we stop engaging with them? Would we create sanctions? No, we wouldn't. We would continue engaging with them because it's not really any of our business what other people do. We are entitled, I think as the Attorney-General said, to create mechanisms that suit us. We are in the middle of March 2025, and it's proposed that the next general election should take place on the 7th of June next year. That has yet to be debated. My proposition was lodged in early January. We have known about it since, I think broadly, the first week in January, and I agreed. I did discuss it with the chair of PPC, and I accept it's a timetable. But I delayed the debate at the request of a member, and also to allow, as I said in my report, to allow members to conduct such consultation as they saw fit. If Deputy Tadier wanted to consult with young people, he has had adequate time to do so. But I have provided a platform for members of the public to come and express their views, and many of them have done so. And I have been open about the shortcomings of those meetings, unlike Deputy Mezek, who consistently bandies around big percentages, but fails to include the relevant piece of information that the turnout was 26%. But I'm not going to get into that again. We have 15 months' time. We have 15 months' time to do this before the next election. If the Assembly makes a decision to bring back senators in March 2025, I believe the public will expect that decision to be implemented in June 2026, as indicated in the proposition. Not to do so, and to wait for another 5 years, I agree with Deputy Miles, would do this Assembly's reputation and credibility no good at all. Lack of trust comes from not listening to the electorate. And I believe there is a very clear, despite what Deputy Joseph says, he came to the meeting, he says not one person has told him they want senators back. He came to the public meeting where 3 people told him very clearly and very passionately. They did. I accept it was only 3 people, but they told him that was what they wanted. Voter turnout was not enhanced by the removal of senators. In fact, voter turnout fell in 2022. And I do fear that this is a wrecking amendment because we all know that one Assembly cannot bind its successor. And we do not know what the next Assembly will do. I am asking you to make a decision now and not to kick the can down the road, not to prove those members of the public right who said they won't vote for this because why would turkeys vote for Christmas? If the Assembly supports the return of senators, then this Assembly should see the return of senators from 2026 and not in another 5 years. I believe that the legislative changes that would be required if my proposition is adopted are not especially difficult. The law drafters are experienced people and they know what they're doing. And I suspect they will already know what's required. They will already have been thinking about it. And to a great extent, they will be returning to previous drafting. I've just had a quick look at the previous legislation to remove senators and create the districts. It was 4 pages. It was 4 pages of amendments to the main law, I believe, a schedule setting out the numbers of deputies, and then a schedule of consequential amendments. it will be a relatively simple matter to unwind all those changes, which were given, as everybody says, careful thought. The legislation should comfortably be before the Assembly, before the summer recess, which will be a year in advance of the next election. And I find Deputy Mezek's laying down of the gauntlet somewhat depressing, that if this Assembly votes for my proposition today, they will have another go at wrecking it when the actual legislation comes forward. In terms of timetabling, the Law Drafting Office will, I am sure, seek to respond to the wishes of this Assembly as they do with any other proposition that has a clear timetable, as will the State's Gref. A timetable is clear and they will work towards that. And I will just confirm, this is not a subject that has been discussed at Council of Ministers. Council of Ministers has noted it's there, and we have simply agreed it's a free vote. And there has been I don't recall there being any further discussion on matters such as this. It's a free vote. We don't talk about it. I have not approached any minister or any member of government to defer legislation. I do not believe that will be necessary. I believe that the Law Drafting Office will try and schedule things as they see fit to get this work through. The administration, I do not believe, this has not stopped the work of government. No minister here has delayed their work timetable, I believe, nor has any backbencher, nor has any scrutiny panel delayed their work because of this. The administration of the 2026 election will be little different to that of the 2018 election and previous elections. And sir, going back to the legislative programme, I will make the offer openly and clearly now that if PPC are too busy to deal with this, or if they have other things that they consider to be more important, I am more than happy to help. I'm more than happy to help with the work and be co-opted on to do it, because that's what I think, because I feel strongly about this, and I'm more than willing to help to do that. Sir, I can only emphasise again, there is nothing whimsical about this proposition. There is nothing new in what I am suggesting. I'm suggesting a return to something that existed for 70 years, a category of member with an island-wide mandate. The public do care about this. I am absolutely convinced of that. Certainly the voting public, for many of us, care. And I am quite sure many of your constituents will have told you, and if they haven't, maybe you're knocking on different doors. But this matters. I am not suggesting that we have AI avatars turning up at hustings. I am not suggesting 3 super constituencies. I am not suggesting anything that we haven't seen before. There is nothing novel about this. It can easily be done, and we are not challenging people to understand something that they haven't understood for decades. I note, however, sir, that P20 of 2025, lodged by Deputy Alves, who's also the Vice Chair of PPC, also proposes changes that would impact on the next election in respect of eligibility criteria. I believe it's a repeat or a very similar proposition to one that was lodged by Deputy Tadier, not for the first time, in December, which we debated and rejected in December. This again is somewhat at odds of what we've been told yesterday, that Reform Jersey are not interested in focusing on electoral reform, but rather on things that matter. Things that matter are still happening. If Deputy Alves' proposition is adopted, the legislative changes could be more complex than they are in respect of reinstating senators. Such is the nature of what's being proposed. That proposition does do something new and will require considerable thought and consideration by law drafting. I say again, mine is just returning to a well-known concept.
Sir, point of clarification, if I may.
Are you prepared to give way?
No, sir. I'd rather finish and then deal with questions, if that's acceptable.
Yes, of course, yes.
But Deputy Alves has also set a date in her proposition to bring those changes into effect in time for the 2026 election. So, sir, I would assume that if members accept PPC's proposition, that we can look forward to seeing Deputy Alves withdraw her proposition because it is too close to the election to be debated and effected. I would also say to Deputy Joseph, he's asking people to put democracy above self-interest. That's exactly what I'm asking people to do. I'm asking people to consider the will of the public, and the will of the public is what democracy is all about. I believe that the changes to my proposition can comfortably be delivered in time for 2026, and I ask members to reject the amendment. Thank you, sir.
Are you prepared to accept the clarification request from Deputy Coles?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. The Deputy aspired that the legislative work required for Deputy Alves's proposition, which has only just been lodged, would be significantly more than this. I just want to know what evidence she has to support that claim.
Well, sir, the evidence I have is that this is an entirely new proposition, which is not in legislation. I believe it's an entirely new thing. It goes to electoral eligibility. People will have to consider how that is drafted, what the exact terms of that are, and to avoid mistakes. It is an entirely new drafting. Mine will simply be reinstating words that have been taken out on an earlier occasion.
But, sir, does the Deputy not acknowledge that there is an eligibility criteria to stand for election currently, so this isn't actually a new piece of legislation, it's amending existing?
I think we're getting into an argument now, not clarification, so you need to deal with that. Deputy Joseph.
I think I've got a genuine point of clarification, sir.
Are you prepared to accept a point of clarification, Deputy Joseph?
No, sir.
No. Who wishes to speak next? Deputy Gorst.
Thank you, sir. This, on the surface, appears to be a process debate, and I don't criticise the Chair and PPC for bringing forward this amendment, which would seek to push ultimately a decision about whether to reintroduce the senatorial office off until A, the next Assembly, and B, the election after next. And it is that juxtaposition between a process debate and the fundamental debate about whether we want to reintroduce the senatorial office that I just want to remind members of. In answer to Deputy Tadier, we've heard Deputy Mezek say in his under 35-year-old view, he doesn't want to see senators reintroduced. I was contacted by two under 35-year-olds who both said they did wish to see senators introduced. One of them, though, sir, it was only their second choice. Their first choice was the reintroduction of absolute monarchy, which I think would probably please you more than it would please us in this Assembly. But we'll put that to one side. So, is this a process debate? Well, it could be argued it was a process debate if there weren't sufficient time. And I think the idea of sufficient time is one that's been explored and been answered very ably by Deputy Miller, that in our system, we have a system of in-principle debates prior to the legislation being brought forward. And this in-principle debate is the principle of whether we should reintroduce senators or not, or the island-wide mandate or not. The title is neither here nor there. It is about the island-wide mandate. And we must be very careful not to confuse what is being portrayed as a process debate because of the Venice Commission requirements, which says, yes, a year should be allowed to elapse before changes. This is a debate about the change. We will then come forward with the legislation, and a lot has been said about the time that the legislation might take to be brought forward. I to the view that actually it's not as complex and complicated as some members have tried to indicate, and that it can be done and brought forward in advance of the summer recess. And of course, there will be amendments, because every single time electoral change has been proposed in this Assembly, there have been amendments too numerous to count. We might think we've been here a long time so far this week, but actually the number of amendments that we've had to this proposal is probably fewer than we might have expected. So I don't ultimately think this is a process debate. This is a debate which those who are in favour of reintroducing the electoral office are going to have to vote twice to reintroduce island-wide electoral mandate. They will have to vote against this amendment, which pushes off ultimately the decision, and therefore we can't be certain that it will be delivered. And the reason I cast doubt on whether it can be certain that island-wide mandate can be delivered if we accept this is because we heard a number of eloquent speeches from my coalition colleagues about the fact that they believe what they've currently got is only a compromise. Fundamentally, they don't agree with it. They accepted it because it was a compromise. They fundamentally want to see in this Assembly a single type of member. And that's an entirely legitimate position to take. And they've been consistent in taking that view. They want to see a single type of member in this Assembly. And I look across to my good friends on the Connetable bench, and I ask them to do the mathematics. When our colleagues are suggesting that they want to see a single type of member, are they somehow going to multiply the number of Connetables so that each parish has got a proportionate number of Connetables? I don't believe they are. I believe that the single member ultimately in this Assembly of their manifesto commitment and their ultimate desire, for all the reasons I respect, is to see just deputies. And this, for me, is why it is incredibly important that we bring back the island-wide mandate. And I know it's not perfect for every islander. And I know that islanders say they want an island-wide mandate. And then they start to ask questions about, should we have 2 election days? Should we go back to, Deputy Messick made a fantastic speech yesterday, to revert us back to 2000, the system we had in place prior to 2005. Where we had an island-wide mandate and you had that stability because you only elected half of them at any given election. If he'd been proposing that, so he'd have had my full support as a colleague in this place. We have to be very careful that we don't, by thinking that we're doing the right thing from a process perspective, even though I don't think we are, because I think there is sufficient time to deliver this from a process perspective and not fall foul of the Venice Convention and international standards requirements. We have to be very careful that in allowing that argument to win the day, we are ultimately saying that is the end of the island-wide office. It will not be possible, I believe, in the election in 2030 to bring it back again then for all of the reasons that I've just articulated. And that will be, whether we like it or not, whether we've got a referendum result that overwhelmingly wanted to keep constables, that will also lead to the end of the office of constable. And I close by reiterating what Deputy Miles said. Are we really, those of us who want to see the reintroduction of the island-wide mandate, are we really going to go onto the doorsteps, if it's successful today, and I hope it is, if it's successful today, are we really going to go back to the electorate and say, well, we've agreed in principle, but we're terribly sorry it's going to take us another 4 years to be able to revert to something that we've been doing for 70 years, but the world is such a changed place that it's now going to take us another 4 years to do that. I do not believe that that is credible. I absolutely accept, as Deputy Oza said, islanders have got many priorities and they want us to be dealing with many issues and they want us to deal with those issues all at the same time. and I believe that this is an issue that islanders want to see us delivering, and it can be delivered whilst we are dealing with all of the other people's priorities as well. Thank you.
Deputy Gorst, it's a small point. As you know, I can't express any opinions in this chamber, rightly so, unless allowed by a standing order. But I'd like you to confirm, for the purpose of Hansard, that you were just joking when you said that I was a fan of absolute monarchy. So I wouldn't want people reading the transcript of today to think that was a widely held knowledge, a view of mine that you were merely communicating to the world at large.
It was nothing to do with your personal opinions. I wouldn't presume to bring that into any state's debate ever. That would be highly inappropriate. Merely that the office of bailiff and deputy bailiff is appointed by His Majesty.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Now, Deputy Renouf.
Yes, sir, very briefly. I must say I found it slightly depressing to see matters of process so easily dismissed in this Assembly. International standards and good practice seem to be just slipping away when it comes to something that is strongly desired by some members. The committee that we charge with looking into these matters has come to a considered view about the timetable that is required, and we've had other very clear arguments made about why there is a need for this to be considered slightly longer than the people who are supporting P2 would like. It does suggest to me a considerable lack of confidence in members in our belief in doing the right thing. Are we going to be bullied into bad practice because we fear some people on the doorstep saying to us, well, you spent too long getting this right? I think we should have more confidence in our belief in what is right and proper and following good practice. And I'm afraid I do see it as slightly symptomatic of the casualness with which this proposition has been approached. It has been approached on the basis that the return of senators is self-evidently a good thing, that it raises no further issues than have been raised previously by having senators in the Assembly, and that is not the case. It isn't that simple. There are these questions of whether or not we will return to staggered elections. There are questions, other questions around boundaries, which we've seen have been not supported to debate, but will now have to be considered by PPC. So I think, and I have to say that I can't see any, I think there was something of a slight slippage in Deputy Gorst's argument around getting rid of the constables, maybe an attempt to rally the vote, I don't know, but it has nothing to do with this question of whether or not we should follow due process and allow a proper examination of the changes that may or may not be coming.
Yes, thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on this amendment? Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. And so I'm very glad that you're in the chair today, because it reminds me of one of my first amendments that I brought to this Assembly, and that you came to my defence in my poor choice of words, which has then made me very aware since that day, sir, to make sure that my words are correct. And of course, this also means that when we read things, we have to interpret what these words mean and what they can mean for the consequences. And this is where I look at the Chief Minister's email from last night. And there's some words in there which are very non-committal, but obviously he's trying to make the point that this is a confirmation that they can do something. Because this work would take approximately 3 months. So that means it could take more, it could take less. You know, that's an approximation. It's a guess. There's things that could be unforeseen, as we hear a lot in this chamber about unforeseen consequences. When we start to do things, we open Pandora's box, as it were, and find new things that we didn't realise before. But of course, Deputy Miller inserts that this is nothing new. Well, actually it is, because the last time we had senators, we had multiple districts across the island, not just 9. We weren't just selectively removing 9 deputies from one to reinstate. So this is actually something new, even if there was a previous template that was drafted in the 1940s. And of course, that's all moved on quite a bit, hasn't it? My favourite word in this, though, is around the necessary legislation could be ready for debate before the summer recess. Now, sir, I used to work in the private sector for a big multinational corporation, and the word could was always thrown around quite nicely. Oh, if you need help, we could get you more staff to help you with that. Of course, that never happened. I was always having to try and do things with one man lighter than I could have needed. So again, a certain level of uncertainty. And so we have to remember that the election day has been posted and is open to amendments. And I have heard that there is potentially an amendment to that day to maybe bring it earlier. Now, of course, that is absolutely speculative until the point that it is actually lodged, because the member who has mentioned this may choose to change their mind. And of course, then that doesn't matter. But if it is to bring the day earlier in the year, then all of a sudden this timetable is shifted again. And while we are already looking at the date for the summer recess, the final sitting is in July. I think it starts on the 8th of July, if I'm correct, sir, which would mean that the legislation, if it's not at the absolute last point before the summer recess, that means it's coming within 11 months of the election already. Notwithstanding, if the member does choose to bring an amendment to the election day, that then maybe will be within 7 months of the election. And this island does pride itself on trying to meet international best standards. We have a reputation to maintain when it comes to our standards, especially within finance and governance. And we talk about political stability, but all of a sudden we're going to throw out this by saying, well, this is just something that we want. And sir, I must admit, I've been staggered by the numbers that I've heard banded around today of support for this proposition. I mean, Deputy Miller replies that Deputy Oates have had 3 people support this, and then Deputy Gorst, 2 people. I mean, I'm glad I've got a hand because I can count all of those. So, sir, I think we do have to make sure that things are done properly. There is no certainty in this. And we have to also remember that law drafting works under the greffier of the Assembly, sir, and so is administered by PPC. So this is where it is important that the advice that comes through from PPC comes from that. And personally, I do believe it should hold more weight in this Assembly. And again, sir, we have to remember scrutiny. This can't be rushed, as Deputy Mezek has alluded before, that the previous one, changes to this legislation, did have errors, and it meant that these errors had to be found ways to be rectified post. And we shouldn't be rushing through legislation which has not been properly scrutinised. And so if we did already have a Senate, maybe that could have scrutinised it effectively itself. But then, of course, that is, again, another debate that would require more thought and should not be rushed. My other point is, sir, is that some of the people who support the return of the island-wide mandate seem worried, and they need to rush to get it through within this sitting of the Assembly, because maybe it is not as popular a decision as they think. And actually, sir, they would like it to be re-established now, so they don't have to go back out on the doorstep and try and actually prove again that this is something that's wanted. Because, sir, if it is something that is wanted, and they do have to fight another election on this, then surely they should be comfortable in the knowledge that it is so widely popular that they will return to their seats and therefore be able to push this through in time for the 2030 election. That way they can follow good process, as well as know in the confidence that their policy on this matter is actually in good standing with the public.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. Hopefully this won't be necessary, but I just wanted to give notice to the Assembly that in half an hour I'll propose that we cut short this debate, sir, under Standing Order 84.
Thank you. Yes, Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir, and thank you to the greffier for enabling me to attend today in this format. So it's been very interesting to listen to all of the debates and all of this debate, and there seems to be a number of areas that are really quite interesting. To hear the Minister for External Relations to say that we must not fall foul of international requirements is, I think, ironic at least. And as chair of CPA, somebody who goes to other jurisdictions representing Jersey to comment on their electoral processes, to hear people perhaps suggest that it's not important that we take note of what is said to us and follow international procedure, I think is a real issue for us. It's also very nice to be able to say that those voices of reason here are from across the Assembly. And I was going to say yesterday that I was in the position of agreeing with Deputy Joseph for Hansard. I can now say today that I'm in the position of agreeing with Deputy Joseph, Deputy Balash, and the very reasoned approach from Deputy Renouf as well. And I think that is such an important point. PPC represent across the Assembly, so political differences are irrelevant. And what we're looking at is what is the right procedures for us to have credibility as an Assembly in the decisions that we make. I'd also like to point out that there is no way that I want to delay any of the legislative work that is going on in education. There is too much that we have to do and so much work going on from people working incredibly hard to do it. So do not come to me for any delay in trying to push this through. I think Deputy Coles made a very good point just now when he said, and I was going to say a similar thing, but I just to emphasise and to perhaps express in a slightly different way, that if we have an election where this has been agreed, if it is agreed in principle, and that the legislation will come in detail after the election, then we will have to stand on the doorstep and justify our position. And I've got to say, I'm pretty sure that the island is aware of Reform's position because we've been mentioned so many times in this debate. There seems to be a slight obsession amongst some members with Reform Jersey. We must be doing something right because we keep getting elected, even though we're completely transparent and consistent in the approach that we want to take to this. And I'm very proud of that. And we would again have to stand on doorsteps and say what we want to do. If the electorate don't want that, that's democracy in action, then we won't be elected. And I think that's what needs to be understood in these circumstances. PPC are quite rightly suggesting that we have to get this right because the electorate are, well, the electorate, we don't have Maury polls here. We don't have enough information on views from our different demographics and sectors. We have an enormous amount of hearsay. So it's really difficult to tell as to what is actually wanted and what isn't. The only chance we've got of that is during an election. And we were elected, we made the change, went into that election. People voted. The reasons for lower turnout are many and varied, and it's not simply whatever system we've got there. I believe that the one we have is more representative of our island, and it takes time to embed that. And so another run through where we have the discussion in the election over the senators and the way they will work, because that will have to be what the debate will be, the way they will work. If this is agreed with moving forward, that's an interesting thing for the hustings, and I hope everybody will talk about that when they do their election campaign. So I urge members to support this, because then you can vote whether you want to or not to return senators. I am slightly concerned of the constant reference to reform, and I stood on the doorstep, was very honest. I've been elected twice. I think I campaigned very hard. I communicate very well, and I have good links across my constituency and indeed across the island. So I think that needs to be taken into account, just as so many other members of this Assembly do. Now, I respect that of members of the Assembly. I hope they respect that of me myself. So I urge members to support PPC who support us, support this simple amendment, and then let's get on to the main debate and try and move this forward so we can come to an outcome. We're spending 2 days talking about ourselves again. I don't think the public really wants us to be doing this, but let's get through it. But this amendment makes sense, it's logical, it's reasoned, and it's the right thing to do. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. So as not to waste any more time on this, I'll just summarise the risks in not voting for the PPC amendment. And they are risks. A delay in getting important matters through the legislative process. So that's one as been described in some really good speeches already. Another is not allowing the current system to bed in without proper review. Then there's a real risk to reduction in voter equity. And that is really important, and it's actually unacceptable to go ahead with this without looking into it properly. Of course, a change to the Constitution like this should not go ahead without careful consideration, and we would be irresponsible to abandon correct international standards and proper review. So I would implore colleagues to carefully consider their responsibilities in ensuring that the work we do is done well and not to rush things through.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Andrews.
Thank you, sir. It was during the 2022 election between April and June where I was canvassing in St Helier North. And one of the things that was very clear to me, it was probably in the top 5 talking points, was constitutional reform and the loss of senators. I probably had about 60 or 70 people who were disenfranchised. For them, it was 8 votes that they previously had that they no longer had. They could only vote for up to 4 candidates for deputy, and they could only vote for 1 candidate for Conatab. It meant they could only vote for up to 5 members when there were 49 members in the State's Assembly. And I understood the frustrations that many of those individuals had. I think, though, when we are here today and we are discussing P2, it's a matter really that should be brought to the public. A referendum is probably the best way when we are discussing constitutional matters. However, given the fact that the proposition has been lodged, it is the will of the State's Assembly now to decide on what we ought to be doing next. I think the PPC have been placed in a very difficult position. After all, they are politicians. It doesn't matter what they decide to do. Whatever is the best way forward that they feel is for the Assembly, they will be judged, they will be scrutinised. I know 6 of the members of the PPC voted against the first proposition that came before the floor of the Assembly in 2022. I think there was only 1 member on the PPC who voted for senators to be reintroduced. But I think the basis of their decision is more about the logistics and how difficult it potentially could be, especially when the executive are trying to rush through some of the legislative programme that they are responsible for before the election. I do understand that as well. But I think you have to also find that balance. I think there are many people who I've certainly spoken to who miss the island-wide mandate. And potentially that is a topic for debate in terms of how that would be constructed. Would it be all deputies potentially facing an island-wide mandate in the future? Who knows? But it's really for the public to determine in that respect. And I hope we can get to a point where that can happen, potentially with the PPC once it's reconstituted. It might be something for them to maybe discuss next term, but given the time frame, I probably would say it's not a pertinent thing for them to pick up on, given the fact that we've only really got about 14 months of active duty in office. But I certainly do understand why the members who are in support of senators, why they want it to be in place for 2026. For them, I think what they are doing is they're listening to the people who they have clearly spoken to. And I think if we are to see the State's Assembly agree for senators to be reintroduced and for that reintroduction to take place in 2030, many people will be very frustrated and they'll be questioning, well, surely the legislature, the State's Assembly should be taking the decision to reintroduce senators, and that should be done for 2026. I think there may be more questions raised if we are to delay the reintroduction of senators for 2030, and I think it potentially could bring us into disrepute already. We have been speaking about ourselves for now 2.5 days, and I think we are at risk of potentially going into this afternoon and potentially 5:30 still talking about the main proposition. So I think it's hopefully now going to be the case where members can keep their speeches nice and concise, to the point, and hopefully then we can move on to some proper State's Assembly business. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Conor Thompson-Brillard.
Thank you, sir. Speaking as a member of PPC and endorsing this proposition, I would just say that from a practical point of view, I fully understand where various members come from and the reasons why they are leaning either for to support the proposition or not, and fully understandable, but the practicality, the decision of PPC has been driven by advice from officers who have to do the work, and that's simply the reason why that the amendment has been put forward, and I intend to support it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conor Thompson-Mary.
Thank you, sir. And following Deputy Andrews' comment, I shall make my own comments very brief. I first remind the members we are here discussing the amendment and not the proposition itself, and it is simply, or not simply, crucially, whether we any change should come into effect in 2026 or for the next election. And in this connection, I align myself with the views of my newfound friend, the Constable St Helier. Effectively, if it is put back to 2030, the chance will have gone. We are people who refrain from debate, from voting in the last election, want a more immediate return to what there was, and they do believe they were disenfranchised, and I have no doubt as to that the veracity of that statement. They said so on polling day, and it therefore comes back to the question as to whether there will be a vote shortly as to whether we want to bring back senators or not, and let's park that for the moment. But do please bear in mind that if this is put back, then I sense that it will never come to fruition again. And I do fear and feel that we've made over much of the question of process. In my work as scrutiny panel member, I frequently come across members of the legal drafting department, whatever name they call themselves now, and they are a very hard-working and intelligent group of people. We've cut through many debates. I remember the particular one for the planning committee where we lodged 11 amendments with their help, and they are a constructive group, and I've no doubt that they will not only come to the fore, but I mean no doubt that there is a margin, there is leeway within the resources of the Lord Draftsman's Department. They have not chalked up every hour until the end of the term as to what they're going to be doing. There will be changes throughout, and so in that sense, I have every confidence that they will be able to cover whatever was required of them. So it therefore brings us back to the compliance with the Venice Convention, or the extent that we need to do so. And I indebted to Deputy Balish to quoting from the report of PPC, where it says election legislation should be enacted sufficiently far in advance of an election date to provide political participants, voters, with adequate time to become familiar with the rules of the election processes. And I heartily agree with that. But there is in parliamentary parlance something called the mischief rule, and in interpreting what is required, the aim is to decide what remedy are they seeking to achieve. And certainly, if this was a completely new system, unfamiliar to voters and potential candidates, I fully agree that further time might be required. But the electorate are familiar with the system. The proposal is to bring back with what they are familiar. So I do not think that the electorate will be disadvantaged if one does slightly fall below the 1 year lapse. I have every confidence that PPC will do as instructed by the Assembly. I have every confidence that the Law Drafting Department will similarly carry out their wishes, and I therefore I shall be voting against the proposition because I believe that it is within the capability of the establishment of this organisation that we can bring about what the electorate need. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Does any other member speak on the amendment?
Thank you, Sarah. I'll speak briefly also as a member of PPC to endorse this amendment. It's common sense to me, and I think the voices that we haven't heard in this debate, because of course the officials within the state's GREF aren't able to speak, but they are the ones who are working tirelessly behind the scenes on the Plan to Stand campaign, which is work that the Diversity Forum have done in previous years to increase the quality and diversity of candidates who would feel able to put themselves forward for election. This work that the state's GREF the work that they're doing, it's really important, and I want to take a moment first of all to thank the officers that are working on that and to remind members that that work has been planned out for a long time based on the system that we have at the moment, and individuals who have already engaged with that campaign and are already making plans are going to be confused at best, at worst disenfranchised and perhaps put off from standing. And of course we want diverse candidates of all kinds. I'm not going to repeat points that I myself and others have made in previous debates about the role of senator being less accessible and entailing more barriers to women and minority communities. But perhaps in the main debate I'll touch on that. But in terms of the date, whether or not we approve the main, whether or not members agree with the main proposition in this case, either way, my personal view is that this amendment makes the main proposition better. So if you agree with the main proposition, I think it makes this better because it gives more time to do the legislation properly, and for those who wanting to stand to actually be able to take part in the Plan to Stand work and properly plan their campaigns and not be disenfranchised. If you don't agree with the main proposition, also you should vote for this, because it makes, if it is going to go through, it makes it less bad, I think. So I would urge members to support this amendment to the main proposition. It was as a result of deliberations across the committee of PPC, which is a broadly representative group of states members, and I hope members would respect the work of PPC and support this amendment today.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on the amendment? Deputy Wilson.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll be brief. Most people have made the points that I wanted to make, but just to say that I will be proposing to support the amendment given by PPC. I do believe that by addressing the way in which this proposition is being put forward by Deputy Miller, that it needs a thorough, balanced and well-researched approach to the question of reintroducing senators. I do believe that it will make and enable the States Assembly, as Deputy Doublé has just referred to make better decisions as to how, if the decision is agreed, or if the proposition is agreed, as to how to go about that. I think we must remember that it is a serious constitutional issue. It's not just a matter of putting numbers and forming laws around that. We've already heard the arguments around the importance of international standards, and I fully support that. But I also think that any change that we make in terms of any legislation, we've got to get our democratic processes right to ensure that any change is thoroughly vetted, its implications are fully understood, and that it genuinely enhances our democratic processes and governance effectiveness. And I think what we're seeking here for those of us who've expressed support for this proposition is for better governance of the way in which we actually approach some of the changes we want to make. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Does any other member speak on the amendment? I call upon the chair to reply.
Thank you, sir, and thank you to everybody who's expressed their thoughts on this. First of all, I'd like to make it absolutely categorically clear that this is not a wrecking amendment, and this is not kicking it down into the long grass, as my fellow Connotab said. If you think about it, this is just, I'm chair of PPC, and PPC has to bring forward principles and good governments, and I'm very fortunate to have a very strong committee from across the Assembly. Sometimes it can be like herding cats because we're all completely different. We have different views. Some of us will be voting for senators, some of us won't be, some of us will be voted for constables and some of us wouldn't. But we all came together with this because we do believe in good governance. So I want to make that categorically clear. And if anybody thinks that it's biased, if they think about the substantive vote yesterday, one that I voted for, this is not a biased. I'm doing this as chair of PPC because that is what I believe this role expects of me. This is a substantive change to the composition of the Assembly, and we should not be seeking to make these changes in an election year. I'm afraid that the Chief Minister has, and I know it would be inadvertently, misled the Assembly. The law drafters who work for the GREF and are not government employees have categorically stated that it will take longer than 3 months to bring this forward for debate. I've been advised directly that it would be the autumn at the earliest. Prioritising the delivery of this legislation will come at a cost, and other things will have to fall off the legislative programme. I do thank Deputy Miller for her kind offer to help, but I do not believe she is a qualified and experienced law drafter. She is incorrect to say that the legislation required is simple, and I'd rather trust the experienced drafters' estimate of the complexity involved. I would also like to say at this juncture that yes, of course, if this is rejected and the main proposition goes through, PPC will of course work quickly and promptly if that is the will of the Assembly, and there's no doubt about that. PPC will be lodging its own election law proposals on the 1st of April for AVR and some general administrative amendments. We've worked to a timetable which will align with the Venice Commission principles because we believe in them, and it is important to set an example and promote good governance. Those amendments have been worked on for the last year, yet are relatively straightforward. Good legislation takes time, and the public deserves good legislation to underpin democratic elections. How can we hold our heads up amongst our CPA colleagues when we reject such fundamental principle of good governance? Let's not let our personal desires for senatorial return cloud our judgment on what is the right way to do that. I was going to address some of the points made by members, but I think I'll send that in an email because we've had a very long debate. So I would just like to ask members to consider all that I've said, and I ask for the appel. Thank you.
The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. Announce that the amendment has been narrowly rejected, 23 votes pour, 24 votes contre, and 1 abstention.
Can we have all the names, sir?
Sorry?
Can we have the names, sir?
Yes.
Those voting pour, the Connétables of St Bralard, St Martin, Deputies Southern, Tadier, Doublé, Ayer, Alves, Moore, Mezek, Ozef, Balash, Coles, Poré, War, Renouf, Curtis, Feltham, Jearn, Kovac, Curtis, Wilson, and online, the Connétable of St Clement and Deputy Ward, and those voting contre, the Connétables of St Helier, St Lawrence, Trinity, St Peter, St John, St Mary, and St Saviour, and Deputies Labby, Luce, Morale, the Hegara, Gorst, Farnham, Miles, Scott, Binet, Miller, Howell, Binet, Ferry, Ward, and Andrews, and online Deputies Gardner and the Connétable of St Juan.
And the abstention?
Oh, sorry, and the abstention was Deputy Stevenson.
Now move back to the...
Sorry, sir, we didn't hear the abstentions.
We did. Deputy Stevenson, I think. Yes. So we now move back to the proposition. Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? Yes, Deputy Ferry.
Thank you, sir. So it is clear that in the proposition to bring back senators to the States Assembly, we're debating an issue that transcends political divisions. It's a call for the restoration of true representation, and I commend Deputy Miller for bringing this back for us to debate ahead of the next election. We long prided ourselves in a unique and robust democratic system, one that balanced representation, accountability and the voice of the people. The role of senators in our States Assembly was not redundant. It was fundamental to ensuring the interests of the entire island were represented fairly and squarely. The loss of the senatorial role has created a vacuum, leaving many islanders feeling disconnected from the Assembly and weakening the fabric of our democracy. Senators are elected by all voters and were accountable to all voters. Their island-wide mandate meant that they had a duty to serve in the best interests of Jersey as a whole, rather than being confined to the interests of a single constituency. This is what made them unique, what made them valuable, and what made their presence in the Assembly indispensable. The removal of senators from our political system was justified by arguments of efficiency and reform, but I don't believe that our system has improved as a result. People feel less represented, and decisions have been made with a lesser sense of island-wide unity. In the absence of senators, we risk drifting into a more fragmented, localised and short-sighted mode of governance. The reality is clear. Without senators, the balance of power has shifted. The representation of island-wide interests has weakened and voter turnout has reduced. While deputies and connétables play a vital role in our democracy, they serve constituencies and parishes. The absence of senators means there is no unifying voice elected by all, no representatives with a mandate to consider the needs of the entire island. We cannot forget the importance of broad, strategic thinking in governance. We face complex and island-wide challenges. Housing affordability, economic development, environmental sustainability, healthcare access and education reform. These are not parish-specific issues. They affect every resident of this island. The role of the senators was to rise above parish lines and focus on the broader issues, ensuring that every voice in Jersey had a stake in the decision-making process. Without them, we lose sight of the bigger picture. Some might argue that the current system without senators still functions. They might say that deputies can work together to represent island-wide issues, but I do not believe that this is enough. A system built on fragmented representation cannot serve the entire island fairly. Without senators, we have lost a critical check and balance in our governance. We have lost representatives who have the ability and obligation to put island-wide interests first. And most importantly, we have lost the trust of many voters who feel that their vote no longer carries the same weight as it once did. Sir, when I last spoke on this subject, I mentioned the photograph of Senator Philip Lefevre, the architect of the biggest piece of social legislation that our island has ever witnessed, the Social Security Scheme. So that photograph now proudly sits in the office of the Minister for Children and Families in Union Street. But restoring the senatorial role is not about nostalgia. It is about strengthening democracy. I've heard it said that we are once again talking about ourselves. My response to that assertion is that what we are talking about is ensuring every voice matters and every citizen feels represented in the Assembly. The decision to remove senators was made with the intention of improving our political system, but we must be honest with ourselves and recognise that there have been unintended consequences consequences, and they have been damaging. We now have the opportunity to correct the course and bring back a fair and balanced representation that the senators once provided. The question before us today is not whether we can function without senators. It is about whether we are willing to accept a diminished version of the democracy that we once had, when we know that we can do better. It is about whether we are willing to stand up while our Assembly becomes less connected to the people that it serves. It is whether we will allow ourselves to continue down this path, or we take action to restore a system that reflects the will of the people. The campaign to bring back senators is not just about political structure. It is about giving power back to the people. It is about ensuring that every citizen, regardless of where they live, has a voice in shaping the future of Jersey. The removal of senators was a significant change to our democracy, and such a change should not have been made without explicit consent of the people. The referendum in 2013 did not provide the binary question of whether or not senators should remain. So the debate today is not one of division, but of unity. This is not about left or right, conservative or progressive. This is about fairness in representation. If we believe in an assembly that serves all of Jersey, then we must restore the senatorial role. We must reinstate the voices that once spoke for all of us, and we must reaffirm our commitment to a system that is just and balanced. We have a choice before us today. We can accept where we have got to, or we can vote for the return of a better, fairer and more democratic future. I, sir, choose the latter. I will vote for the reinstallation of senators who once stood for all the island. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So, point of clarification, or you want to speak? Thank you. Deputy Mezek, please.
Thank you, sir. I think one of the most frustrating parts of these debates on reintroducing senators is the consistent co-option of cliches which stand no basis in fact or evidence whatsoever, which I'm sorry to say the previous speaker's speech was absolutely packed full of them. Talking about fairness, sir, when voter equity is a formula, it's evidence-based, it's numbers-based, and this proposition doesn't deliver it. So talking about balance on the Senator's platform. So balance is provided across a whole Parliament, not just reserved for 9 seats in it, to make sure that this entire Assembly reflects the will of the public for all of us sitting there. And that means having a balance of diversity and representation for different parts of the island and the different political views we hold. So if you carve the Assembly up in the way that P2 proposes, you make it harder to deliver that. I reject any suggestion whatsoever that the current makeup of the Assembly, delivered through a voter equity-based system and deputies representation and the parish constables, doesn't provide that kind of balance or somehow denigrates the work that this Assembly does, because all of our elections were fair and robust last time, because it was a simpler system that drew out candidates who otherwise we may not have seen, some of whom came out of nowhere and did absolutely spectacularly, and some who'd been present for a long time on the senators' benches, for example, who ended up disappearing because it turned out that when it came to actually meeting people on the doorstep, they just weren't that popular. What you do by creating the hierarchy is you don't bring politicians that are closer to the people. You develop politicians that are further away from the people because they don't actually have to meet voters in order to get elected. They can fly through their campaign on a bit of good media coverage and a name that's recognised. So when I ran last time for deputy, as compared to senator previously, I had to knock on doors and meet people. And you know what? I met a handful of people who didn't like me, who wanted to explain that, who wanted to close their door in my face, and who wanted to say, no, I disagree with everything you're standing for. And it's a very humbling experience that every one of us should have to go through from time to time to remind us where we come from and make us constantly reevaluate whether what we stand for is right. And the result, so long as it's done on a proportionate voter equity-based system, will help deliver that. But so what is another recurring theme in this debate, and one which I have to say the proposer of this is extremely guilty of? It is the denigration of evidence that doesn't back their position, whilst extolling far weaker evidence just because it's convenient to do so. And I will not accept, sir, a reference to poorly attended public meetings at which there was a diversity of opinion as somehow being a greater litmus test than an actual referendum where people were asked to come forward, cast a ballot and tell us what they actually wanted. So the proposer of this denigrates that exercise because of the voter turnout in it. So that is a reason to denigrate most of us in this assembly, because turnouts across our constituencies are not particularly good. But to denigrate a referendum in which, by my calculation, about 18,000 people came out to vote in, but say, yeah, I got a letter signed by 70 people, that counts for more, is absolutely absurd. It is not reflective of wider view out there, sir. And what has happened, sir, and again, sir, this, if you want to go by the anecdotal evidence of those letters, or you want to go by the anecdotal evidence of people turning up at very poorly attended public meetings, so let's go for some other types of anecdotal evidence, sir. Let's go to what people have been posting on social media time and time again when this has been raised. And every comment I'm about to read out, sir, comes from this latest iteration, sir, and you'll spot many recurring themes in here. More time wasting. Some people are invoking things that are against standing orders for me to repeat, sir. Not again, it's been rejected so many times. Why waste states' time trying to go backwards? Have they nothing better to do? And what if all 12 senators, or I suppose 9 for this one, get roles on the backbenchers, not forced to be given any job in government, backward step to put them back in? The states need to stop looking backwards. We have far too many amateurs in the chamber, and we need proper wages for half the number of politicians and no constables. Interesting position. One person just said senseless. Another says if she really wanted to succeed, she would propose a full island-wide mandate. States members are looking to have one class of members, not return to 3. It's a waste of time and will be defeated. Reduce the number of members. You're spotting some recurring themes here, sir. It's more important than the island-wide. That way I might just return to voting. Oh dear, they can't let it lie, can they? Is there seriously not more important issues to discuss, like how massively understaffed the health sector is? The island has far more pressing matters than this nonsense. No debate on funding events like the Battle of Flowers, air display, etc., but they are wasting time debating themselves and elections again. Seems like once a year they do this. No one is asking for senators to be reinstated. They want island-wide voting. The two are not mutually inclusive. That's the point I'll return to, sir. And I have to say, sir, my favourite one, sir, was somebody who didn't actually leave a comment, but instead posted a GIF of Mr. Bean yawning. Very relatable, sir. But, sir, at those public meetings where people came out in good faith, in small numbers, but I don't denigrate any member of the public who came to any of those meetings. I attended a few myself, with the exception of the St. Clement meeting. Of all the ones I went to, I was by quite some distance the youngest person there. They were not representative of the age diversity. St. Clement, I was beaten by Deputy Alex Curtis, who I think is just a few weeks younger than me, or something like that anyway. So they were not, there was not a diversity of our entire island community represented at those meetings. And so whilst it's fair to say that of the people that attended there, a majority would have put their hands up to say they like the idea of island-wide voting, at every one of those that I attended, and I would offer some views and some questions, when you scratch beneath the surface, this particular iteration of island-wide voting is not very popular at all. I would ask people who were present there, is 9 how many island-wide members you want? Is that as far as it goes? And of course, note, immediately you divide the room at that point between some who would say, actually, no, I'd prefer a lot more, plenty who would actually want the whole lot of us elected on an island-wide basis. You would get people who would say, yes, I'm happy for a number of senators to be reintroduced, but I prefer them to be dealt with at a separate date to the election for deputies so that people could step up or step down or what have you. There's a complete diversity of opinion as to the right way to actually do this. And clearly, sir, no overwhelming support for simply chopping a deputy seat off every district to create 9 senators to be elected on the same day, for them to then go on to do the exact same job as the deputies. So that, of course, has not been, I think, properly advocated for citing any kind of public enthusiasm for it. But, of course, they will ignore the greatest exercise of democratic consultation on this subject that there ever was, which was that 2013 referendum, where 80% of people who came out to vote voted to scrap the system that Deputy Miller wants us to reintroduce, claiming it's popular. There is no evidence of that at all, and it's simply being ignored, the real evidence that there is on this subject, because it's inconvenient. But it does have to be said that a couple of times in this debate, some members have said the quiet part out loud. Deputy Miller, I think, made some interesting comments about culture in her opening speech on this. I wonder if that's an argument for going back to bringing the rectors back, because, of course, they were present in this assembly for hundreds of years. And she looks at me with disdain when I say that. I mean, I have disdain for her argument because it's so ridiculous and unevidence-based. That was part of our culture for years. Why do we not go back to it? Because obviously it would be extremely undemocratic. But, sir, we must respect our culture, sir, our Jersey culture, by going back to the system that was given to us by the British Home Office in 1948. Yes, that's what we do here as Jersey. So the only kind of new idea separate to that Deputy Miller extolled in her speech was the idea, sir, of actually limiting the franchise even further just to British citizens, to actually take away the voting rights of islanders. How can you claim to be in favour of democracy and argue that fewer people should be able to vote, sir, and to argue that that ought to be done on the basis of prioritising immigrants from Britain, but not immigrants from Madeira or Ireland or all the other places that people come to Jersey from? An absolutely outrageous suggestion that we should have short shrift against. But a few members, of course, have brought up the dynamic of party politics into this, and the presence of the centre-left party Reform Jersey into it. Again, sir, I think that's saying the quiet part out loud, as if that ought to be any kind of consideration in determining what would be a fair and equal voting system for the island to get them the representation that they want. At the end of the day, sir, if we, on these benches, are so terrible, fight us and beat us in a fair election and convince people to do so. Don't come up with a fudge of a system to try to engineer a result that you want, because that's completely undemocratic. And Sir, Deputy Scott previously referred to multi-member plurality voting and the issues she has with that with deputies. And of course, the solution to that, sir, is to create another multi-member plurality constituency, which is the island-wide constituency, which would be subject to all of the same flaws as that. So this proposition was described by Deputy Miller early on in her speech as having an air of going backwards. But it's more than just an air, so it's a tornado, sir, going round and round in circles again at such force, causing nothing but damage in the meantime as islanders continue to lose faith that we're actually going to deal with the issues that matter to them, talking about ourselves and making so many points, sir, for which there isn't an ounce of evidence, and where evidence can be provided, to ignore it simply because it's inconvenient. Sir, this proposition is backwards looking. If we want to have a better voting system, we ought to consult properly with the public about moving forward. There was an exercise in 2012-2013 led by Deputy Balash at the time, which did properly engage with people, consider different options, and ultimately gave the choice directly to the public at the end of it. And the Assembly made a mistake in ignoring it then, although it fixed it in time for the 22 election, and it's at risk of ignoring that all over again and going back in time to something that frankly will not settle the argument, because you'll just have an election next year, messy as anything, or all sorts of contortions as people try to fit into whatever constituency, senator or deputy that they think is best for them. And the first thing that the next Assembly will do, no doubt, is say, God, what a mess, sorry, I retract that, sir, what a shame, what a mess that was. And let's go back and have another view at this subject again. A complete waste of all of our time when we ought to be getting on with the things that matter to islanders.
Propose the adjournment.
Jesse, the adjournment is proposed. Members content to adjourn? So members know the next three speakers are Deputy Ayer, then Deputy Renouf, then Deputy Tadier.